Chapter 721. Dean lifted Siam Manson with one hand and asked him to show him the way. Then he chased along the street at full speed. It didn't take long for him to see the pioneer in front of him. The heat surging in his body was as hot as a fireball, extremely conspicuous in the dark night sky. Dean also knew that Siam Manson did not blindly show him the way. He slowed down a little to avoid alerting the enemy and followed far behind. 4 or 5 minutes later, Dean saw a group of faint red lights behind the dark street building in front of him. It seemed that a large group of ordinary people had gathered together. He jumped to the top of a building on the street and immediately saw the situation in front of him. It was a huge castle with towering walls built outside the castle. At the moment, a few candles were lit on it, and a large number of figures gathered on the walls. On the spacious street in front of him, a large number of undeads gathered and swayed toward the huge castle. Dean could faintly hear chaotic shouts coming from the castle. Obviously, there was a fierce battle with a group of undeads, and the shouts attracted more undeads there. Bang! While he was looking, suddenly a loud noise came from thousands of meters away on the east side of the castle. Dean was surprised and turned his head to look. Suddenly, he saw a group of extremely dense, blazing figures appeared at the location of the loud noise. Looking at his movements, it seemed that he was fighting fiercely with something. Dean immediately thought of Eleanor, who had turned into an undead. At this time, the pioneer flying in the air quickly landed, ignoring the struggling castle, but rushed to the east side of the battle. Roar! Dean heard a roar, which was extremely ferocious and harsh, as if the vocal cords were broken. He couldn't tell whether it was a man or a woman. He saw a 3-story pointed building suddenly burst, and a black figure covered in rags rushed out from it. His hair was disheveled, and he looked like a demon. 2 other blazing figures followed him and attacked crazily. There are not many pioneers who can fly. This reinforcement is most likely from the Winged Demon clan. I'm afraid he has extraordinary skills. Dean's eyes flashed, and he was a little worried. After all, it was 1 against 2. Although the strength of the undead would soar several times after turning into an undead, it was inevitable that he would suffer losses if he lost consciousness and the battle was chaotic. He didn't want to lose a pioneer-level undead that he had sent in with great difficulty. He quickly made a decision and left Siam Manson behind. He said coldly, "You wait here. You'd better not try to escape." Siam Manson also noticed the intense battle in front of Baron Angeli's castle. The zombies on the street seemed to be guided by something, and they all rushed over. The situation wasn't looking good. At this moment, seeing that Dean had spared no effort to help, he suddenly thought of many things, including Dean's identity, which seemed to be traceable. At this moment, seeing Du Dian's explanation, he quickly said, "No, I won't run around blindly. There are undeads around. If I accidentally bump into one, then I'll be better off dead than alive." Dean sneered, raised his hand to grab his ankle, and overturned him to the ground. His hands pressed down on his knee and shook it slightly. Click! Under the observation of the X-ray vision, Dean's knee had been dislocated. He did the same and dislocated the other leg. He believed that with Siam Manson's ability, there should be no way for him to recover by himself. Siam Manson almost screamed in pain. Fortunately, Dean's action was quick, and the pain soon disappeared. He said to Siam Manson, who was sitting on the ground, "Be honest. She will look after you here." After that, he quickly jumped down from the building and ran along the street. He didn't intend to take Aisha with him. Judging from the intensity of the heat source, the 2 pioneers were inferior to Hero and Ronan, who he had seen before. They should be ordinary pioneers. He was not worried that he was wrong. At this moment, in the fierce battle, the 2 should not have the mind to hide their strength, so the heat in their bodies should be the most real. He was confident that with his current strength, it was enough to compete with ordinary pioneers. Roar! The undeads on the street saw Dean running at high speed and were immediately attracted by him. Although Dean had undead powder on his body, his movement was too big and successfully attracted the attention of the undeads. Dean ignored them and ran all the way. Soon he got rid of the undeads. As for those who blocked the way, They were directly thrown to the side of the street by his palm. Their skulls were bent, but they were still roaring. Soon, Dean arrived at the battle circle. He didn't immediately join the battle, but first observed the situation. He immediately found that the undeads fighting with the two pioneers were not Eleanor, but a middle-aged male undeads. He looked ferocious, with more than a dozen spikes of different lengths protruding from his back. His hair stood up like steel needles, and there were several strange short arms under his armpits. His eyes were glowing with green light, and he kept roaring. In addition to his head, more than 90% of his body was demonized. The two pioneers also entered the demonic state to fight. At first glance, it looked like three humanoid monsters fighting together. Among them, the flying pioneer had a pair of giant black wings on his back. The wings were 14 or 15 meters long, and the demonic body was more than 3 meters high. His whole body was protruding with skeleton-like bones. It was hard to tell whether it was a strange armor or a demonic body. The other one was a woman, but her hair was like a sharp knife divided into two sides. Dark silver scales covered her whole body, including small scales on her plump chest. There was a strange mouth on her abdomen, revealing slender, sharp teeth. The appearance of the two alone was enough to scare a lot of civilians to death. At this moment, the two joined forces to outflank the middle-aged undeads, forcing the middle-aged undeads to retreat. The two obviously knew the weakness of the undeads, so they cooperated so well that the middle-aged undeads didn't know which one to attack and was completely led by the nose. When the middle-aged undeads rushed to the Wings Pioneer, the silver-scaled woman attacked his legs. As for his back, which was full of spikes, there was no way to attack. Dean watched for a while and found that the middle-aged undeads were much faster than the two of them. However, the two of them were very clever. Although they were caught, they could always escape. Especially the Wings Pioneer, when he couldn't retreat, he flew into the air with the help of his giant wings, leaving the middle-aged undeads standing on the ground and roaring helplessly. Under the two's attacks, the middle-aged undeads had been seriously injured. Although it had no pain, its body would still be affected by the injury. Roar! Roar! The middle-aged undeads roared angrily with thick ink-like blood flowing out of his body. Once again, he caught up with the Wings Pioneer, and his beast-like claws pounced on the Wings Pioneer's shoulder. The Wings Pioneer's face changed. He hurriedly flapped his wings, rolling up the sand on the ground. His body rose into the air and stepped on the undead's chest. With the help of the Force, he flew backward and jumped into the sky. The middle-aged male corpse missed his target and almost fell to the ground. Looking at the pioneer of the wing race flying in the air, he roared to the sky as if he was unable to restrain his anger. All of a sudden, the spikes on his back changed. They grew again, and the spikes merged together in 2s and 3s. After a while, the spikes turned into a pair of skeleton-like, hideous wings. The wings were extremely ugly, short, and asymmetrical. However, as the middle-aged undeads roared, they flapped and drove his body to fly. The silver-scaled woman, who was about to attack the back of the middle-aged undeads, was shocked by the sudden change and didn't attack. When the middle-aged undeads flew up, she realized that she had missed the perfect opportunity to attack. Annoyed, she stamped her feet and jumped up, continuing to attack the middle-aged undeads flying in the air. The middle-aged undeads seemed to be flying for the first time. He was unstable and flew slowly. Seeing this, the Wings Pioneer immediately swooped down, waved a spine-like long whip in his hand, and hit the chest of the middle-aged undeads, knocking him down. Chapter 722. The virus has the ability to make life evolve rapidly, greatly shortening the normal evolutionary process. The theory of evolution was common knowledge in the old era, but not many people really understood it. Darwin's theory of evolution was gradually perfected. It was more appropriate to call it the theory of evolution. Species evolved according to the environment, but the process was slow. The reason was that life was too complex. Even a very small life, or even a small organ of the human body, had a complex structure. Even in the old era of science and technology, It was impossible to create a human organ from scratch. The only way to replace it was through transplantation. Seeing the change of the middle-aged man, he could not help but think of Aisha. Would she still maintain her human appearance when she was in danger in the future? Would the demonic factors in her body be stimulated, mutate into another appearance, and never return to her original appearance? Thinking of this, he suddenly felt lucky that he did not put her in danger before. In the future, he would never put her in a desperate situation again. While he was lost in his thoughts, the situation of the battle in front of him had been reversed. The middle-aged male corpse and the ugly wings that had just mutated forced the silver-scaled woman and the youth of the wing tribe to retreat. In a short period of battle, it had gradually mastered the use of the wings. With the help of the wings, its speed increased again, and it was getting faster and faster. A blood-curdling scream was heard as the middle-aged man pounced on the silver-scaled woman. She couldn't dodge in time and was accidentally bitten on her arm. She was greatly shocked and didn't hesitate to cut off the bitten arm with her sword. The arm was covered with silver scales and strange thorns. When the sharp sword cut down, the scales retracted into the arm, revealing a snow-white, slender arm. There was a bite mark on it. The sword light flashed, and the arm was cut off. The next moment, the silver scales gushed out and covered the broken arm, stopping the bleeding. The middle-aged man roared and rushed again. At this time, the youth saw that the situation was not good. He hurriedly swooped down and grabbed the back of the middle-aged man's neck with two eagle-like palms. He tore off a piece of flesh, but failed to tear off the head. The middle-aged man didn't care. He roared and pounced on the silver-scaled woman. He opened his mouth and bit on the plump part of her chest. Sharp teeth as thick as fingers protruded out of his mouth and easily pierced through the silver scales on her chest. The silver-scaled woman screamed in pain and raised her hand to slap him, but she could not push him away. Seeing this scene, the pioneer of the wing race turned pale and knew that she was doomed. She was bitten so close to her heart that it was hard to save her even if she cut off this piece of flesh immediately. He stared at the middle-aged man's corpse that was crazily biting the silver-scaled woman's body. He stood in the air for a while, and then suddenly came to his senses. He flapped his wings, turned around, and ran away. He knew that he couldn't kill the male corpse on his own. Staying here would only be a waste of time. It was better to report to his superiors as soon as possible. When he was about to turn around and leave, Dean had recovered. His eyes flashed, and he immediately stepped forward. He entered the demon body and flew into the air. The opponent was a pioneer, so he did not dare to hold back. Seeing Dean suddenly jump out, the Wing family pioneer was startled. When he saw Dean was a human being, he was relieved. The next moment, he sensed the heat intensity in Dean's body, which was extremely vigorous and not inferior to his. He could not help but be overjoyed and hurriedly said, "Are you from the monastery? Or from the military? Let's work together to kill it while it's not on guard." Dean nodded. "Okay." He turned his dark golden pupils and fell on the middle-aged man's corpse, exuding an amazing killing intent, firmly locking it. With the help, the Wing family pioneer's confidence doubled. It would be the best if he could kill the male corpse on the spot, because once he left, it would be fine if the silver-scaled woman was devoured. If she was not completely dead, she would be a pioneer-level walking corpse. Such a potential danger must be eliminated while she still retained her human consciousness. Kill! With a roar, he turned around and flew out with his spear. His giant black wings danced like a rotating giant cone, rushing straight to the male corpse. Dean followed him closely, raising the sharp blade on his tail. At the same time, several monstrous limbs on his back also stood up like a peacock spreading its tail. His speed suddenly increased, catching up with the Wing family pioneer in front of him. What? The Wing family pioneer felt something wrong. He turned his head and suddenly found that Dean was looking at him with killing intent. He was shocked and then angry. Dean didn't say much. The sharp blade on his tail suddenly pierced through the pioneer's wings. With a slight twist, a large number of feathers fell. At the same time, the monstrous limbs on his back extended and shot out like several hidden spears, piercing a few holes in the pioneer's wings. The wing family pioneer turned back and stabbed Dean's face with his spear, forcing Dean to retreat. At the same time, he turned to face Dean. His whole body was alert, and his eyes flashed with amazing coldness. "Who are you?" "A man." Dean rushed again, not giving him a chance to breathe. He thought his sneak attack could succeed, but he didn't expect to be detected by the pioneer. The pioneer was really not so easy to deal with. The wing family pioneer roared angrily, his golden hair flying. He waved his spear like thousands of arrows, as fast as shadows, but extremely real, covering all parts of Dean's body. Dean was shocked in his heart. Unable to see through the flaws of the pioneer's attack, he suddenly wanted to retreat. But the wing family pioneer seemed to see through Dean's plan. He suddenly stabbed his spear toward Dean's throat. It was too late for Dean to retreat. His heart was full of cold sweat. His sharp limbs and long tail all swung out, and with several clanging sounds, the long spear was knocked away in the chaos, and the danger was averted. The wing family pioneer retreated a few feet. His face was ugly. Cracks appeared on the back of his hand, which was holding the spear, and blood oozed out. After repelling him, Dean breathed a sigh of relief. The next moment, he noticed the injury on the pioneer's claw. He was stunned. Suddenly, it occurred to him that although his fighting ability was not as good as the pioneer's, his strength and speed were faster than the pioneer's. It was just that he lacked experience. Facing the previous gorgeous spear, it was difficult for him to think of a way to break it. But now, in retrospect, it was not difficult to resolve this spear. He just needed to regard any spear as a real spear, ignore the others, and only parry one. In this way, the rest of the phantoms would naturally collapse. This method was simple, but it was difficult to make instinctive judgments in a fight between minutes and seconds. After all, he had too little experience. At the same time, it showed that this spear was really good. Like a peacock spreading its tail, it was full of momentum, enough to deter the enemy and make their judgment slow. You have your strengths, and I have mine. Let me use my strengths to attack your weaknesses. Dean's eyes were full of killing intent. He suddenly rushed out again, still attacking in a frontal manner. The wing family pioneer snorted, shook his spear, and attacked Dean again. But this time, he didn't use the phantom-like spear technique, but a simple and direct spear, like a dragon going out of the sea, carrying a tremendous momentum. Dean narrowed his eyes and suddenly made a move. His side-like arm cut the spearhead obliquely, and his body leaned sideways, so that the somewhat slanted trajectory of the spear crossed his shoulder. At the same time, the sharp blade limbs and the pointed tail on his back suddenly stabbed out, entangling the pioneer like a viper. With the help of many years of carving practice, he was multitasking. His attack was swift and fierce, like a man-eating flower that suddenly opened, showing its fangs, and surrounded the wing family pioneer. The wing family pioneer's face changed. He suddenly changed his hand to hold the spear, which was moving rapidly. Then he swung the spear, and with two clangs, he blocked the two sharp blade limbs. But it was too sudden. His arm was scratched by another sharp blade limb, and a huge wound appeared in an instant. The dark hard shell covering the surface of his arm seemed to be useless. Chapter 723. After a successful attack, Dean immediately followed up. His movements were extremely strange. He crawled or leaped, quickly approaching the wing family pioneer. He swung his tail to stab the pioneer's waist from the side. At the same time, several sharp blade-like limbs on his back attacked from the other side. The wing family pioneer's face changed, and he immediately waved his spear to resist. Although he only had one arm, the spear shaft danced in his palm like a pen, skillfully controlling it. Just as he blocked the blade-like limbs and the pointed tail on both sides, Dean suddenly reached out his hand to stab. His arms were like two sabers, and his fingertips crossed the pioneer's chest, leaving a bloodstain. The wing family pioneer's face changed. He hurriedly flapped his wings, rolling up the sand on the ground to affect Dean's sight and to pull away. He glanced at his scratched arm and found that the blood kept flowing and the wound showed no sign of healing. He was shocked. If he was cut by a sword, it could be healed in a blink of an eye. The demonic body could be reconstructed repeatedly, so he was not afraid of injury. However, at this moment, the demonic body covering his arm was not reconstructed and glued. He noticed that the shape of the wound was unusual. It seemed to be a very subtle sawtooth. He looked up at Dean's waving limbs. All of them were as sharp as knives, and the edges were smooth. There was not the slightest serrated shape. However, the damaged tissue was not fake. Damn it, he bitterly glanced at Dean. He could not tell what kind of demonic mark it was from this weird, demonic body. He suppressed his killing intent, no longer fighting, and turned to fly away. How could Dean let him go? He immediately jumped to chase. The Wing family pioneer's huge wings were pierced by Dean's sneak attack, and his flying speed was greatly reduced. Dean soon caught up with him. Dean immediately activated the dragon blood magic. His heart was pounding, and his blood was surging like a river. His whole body felt red and swollen, full of exuberant energy and wild power. He roared and waved his arms to attack the pioneer of the Wings race. The Wing family pioneer was shocked and hurriedly turned around to block with his spear. Dean ignored his spear and pounced on his wings. Puff! His hands slashed on the wings, cutting 2 horrible wounds, and blood spilled. Bastard! The Wing race pioneer was furious. He stopped running and turned around to stab with his spear. Dudian's eyes were cold as he met the spear head-on. He waved his arm to block the spear. The black liquid covering his scythe arm suddenly faded, revealing a pale and slender palm. He grabbed one of the wings of the scythe. "Get down!" Dean roared and swung his arm down. The Wing family pioneer's giant wings were restrained, and he fell down uncontrollably. Before he fell, he retracted his spear again and stabbed at Dean's chest angrily. Ding! The tip of the spear seemed to stab a metal plate. Dean's body was pushed back, and the Wing family pioneer fell even faster. Boom! He fell heavily on the ground, and his giant wings landed at the same time, setting off a lot of dust. In the dust, the Wing family pioneer slowly climbed up from the ground, gasping for breath. He stood up with his spear and flapped his giant wings, sweeping away the dust in front of him. He looked up at Dean in the air, with killing intent in his eyes. But the next moment, his face suddenly changed. He looked down in horror and saw a ferocious, burly figure standing in front of him. The demon-like mouth was full of blood, which was still dripping. It was the male corpse. The pioneer of the Wing race's face became stiff. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw that the silver-scaled woman's body had been bitten into a bloody mess. Her chest was gone, and her abdomen was torn open. Her organs were scattered on the ground. It was extremely bloody. No! He suddenly came to his senses and instantly flapped his giant wings to retreat. At this moment of life and death, he erupted with unprecedented speed and power. The giant wings that were already riddled with scars flapped crazily, propelling his body to shoot into the sky like an arrow leaving the bow. Looking at the male corpse on the ground, before he had time to breathe a sigh of relief, he suddenly heard a buzzing sound. He looked up in horror, only to see Dean appear above his head. And when he looked at him, he was greeted by several sharp monster limbs whipping. Puff! Puff! 2 sounds of flesh and blood tearing rang out. His body fell to the ground again like an angel with broken wings. The male corpse smelled the tempting smell of blood and couldn't wait to chase him. When the Wing family pioneer fell to the ground, the male corpse rushed to him and threw him to the ground. In the rising dust, the Wing family pioneer's screams came out. Dean frowned slightly and turned back. Before leaving, he glanced at the silver-scaled woman and found that her head was still intact. Although her beautiful cheeks were a bit blurred, the bridge of her nose was bitten off, and the left side of her face was bitten off. Her brain was not damaged. Although her neck was seriously injured, it was not broken. It seemed that she would wake up again sooner or later. His figure quietly flew away in the night and returned to Aisha's side. Xiao Manson sat on the ground. Seeing Dean's ferocious figure, He was scared and instinctively shrank back. Dean glanced at Baron Angeli's castle in front of him. The flames of war were spreading and more undeads were gathering. Obviously, there was no strong person who could clean up the undeads there. The 2 pioneers who came to help were also dead. Everyone sheltered in this castle would also die tonight. In his mind, he could almost see the faces of those desperate people hugging each other, as well as their tearful eyes. They thought they had found a shelter, but the shelter had been destroyed, and this peaceful place had immediately become the bloodiest hell. He thought of that elder and little girl, especially the little girl's bright black eyes, raising her head to look at him, indescribably cute. However, in the end, it was also going to be destroyed, just like a pure lily devoured by flames. After a moment, he felt the movement of the male corpse in the distance. He didn't stay any longer. He picked up Xiao Mansun and shook the bell to let Aisha follow him. Then he turned around and jumped off the building. He quickly left along the messy street. Xiao Mansun, who was in Dean's hands, said in astonishment, "Didn't you come to help? The situation there should be very bad. The longer they fight, the more undeads will be attracted. Aren't you going to help them clean up these undeads? With your strength, it should be very easy to solve it, right?" Dean indifferently said, "I have helped them." Helped? Xiao Mansun was at a loss. Chapter 724. Noise didn't sleep all night as he was waiting in the square. He greeted Dean when he saw him. Dean threw Xiao Mansun to him. "Give him to Poland. Let Poland teach him how to do it." "Yes, young master." Noise saw Xiao Mansun's clothes and knew that he was the same as Poland. He asked, "Master, is everything going well?" "Yes." Dean said, "It's getting late. You should go and rest." "Yes, young master." Dean entered the temple with Aisha. He took out the god's marrows and injected 3 tubes into himself. His body felt saturated and swollen. He put away the rest of the god's marrows and closed the temple. He went back to his bed and closed his eyes to rest. Aisha quietly sat on his bedside while he slept. Her pure black eyes were faintly staring at the dark hall. Dean woke up the next day and enjoyed his breakfast. He chewed and swallowed as he listened to the news from Barton. The outer wall had gradually calmed down. The barbarians had secretly settled in the slums. Although the news had been leaked out many times, but the Dark Parliament and the military had blocked the news. Civilians didn't know about the changes in the barbarians and didn't care about it. In addition, the military had been reorganized by Richelieu and had become the #1 legion of the Holy Church. In addition, the Knights Hall, Magistrate, nobles, and other forces were gradually integrated under the double infiltration of the Dark Parliament and the Holy Church. It was only a matter of time before they were completely unified. There were many small episodes in addition to these big problems. Arson from the Temple of Elements wants to see you and exchange knowledge with you. Barton looked at Dean. "In my opinion, he should want to stay by my side." Dean nodded slightly as he heard the old man's thoughts. Although he didn't elaborate, but he had a little impression of the old man. He was one of the few people in the temple who had offended him. Most of them were jealous that Dean had been living in the temple for a long time, so they wanted to get a piece of the pie. After all, the honor of accompanying the Pope was enough to make people envious. Moreover, they could get endless benefits. "If he wants to talk again, let Edward do it," Dudian said. The masters of Temple of Elements were insignificant in his eyes, but it was good to use them as whetstones for Edward. All right. Barton understood Dudian's meaning. Edward is too young. Can he deal with him? After all, Arson is a master. What master? I'm just someone who knows a little. Dean was very relieved. Heroes don't care about their age. Some people treat a year as a day. Some people treat a day as a year. The only difference that can be brought by age is the face of marriage and childbirth, as well as the body's condition after aging. The rest is just the idea of not growing up. Barton scratched his head. I got it. Dudian asked, "Is there any trace of the person who left us in the outer wall? The preacher who claimed to be from the monastery in the inner wall?" Barton said, "This person is strange. He didn't go back to the inner wall after he left. Instead, he went to various entertainment venues. He has been drinking in different pubs for the past few days. Someone threw him out of the pubs. I have sent people to keep an eye on him." Dean was surprised. He thought for a moment and said, "Don't disturb him. Let it be." "Yes." Bart nodded. After breakfast, Noyce had already woken up and reported to the temple. Dean asked him to lead the way to the dungeon. He wanted to see the two war gods. Dean came to the dungeon through the dark underground tunnel. Although he was prepared, he still felt a trace of instinctive cruelty when he saw the two war gods. Their hair was disheveled, and their bodies were covered in chains. Even the slightest movement would cause the chains to jingle. The two of them emitted a strong smell of blood, and the chains wrapped around their bodies were also covered in dried blood. Their bodies were riddled with wounds and riddled with holes. Their limbs were all crippled, and they hung limply on the torture devices. Their breaths were weak, and their mouths were gagged. They couldn't bite their tongues, and they couldn't die even if they wanted to. During the days of imprisonment, it was obvious that no one had bathed them. The blood caused by the daily torture washed their bodies over and over again, turning them dry and hard like beggars. "Elder." The two burly men on duty quickly stood up when they saw Noyce. They looked at Noyce nervously with a flattering and nervous expression. Noyce nodded. "Wake them up." "Yes." The two of them answered and turned around to pick up the buckets beside them. The icy cold water poured over their heads, instantly waking them up. As soon as the two of them woke up, they noticed Dean standing in front of them. They struggled violently, and their eyes revealed a crazy, killing intent. They stared at Dean as if they wanted to kill him with their eyes. Dean pulled a chair and sat in front of them. "What do you think? Do you want to cooperate with me or continue to suffer here? You've suffered so much, but the military might not know of your loyalty. His Majesty Aristotle might not know either. Why do you have to suffer like this?" The two of them groaned, their faces full of anger. Dean raised his hand. Noyce asked the two burly men to take out the gags from their mouths. "You want to die a good death?" Hero roared in anger. His blood-stained face was full of madness. Ronan looked at Dean. "I'll curse you forever, even if I go to hell." Dean raised his eyebrows. "Are your bones so hard? You can leave here as long as you lower your head. You won't have to suffer anymore. You can sleep on a soft and comfortable bed. You will have beautiful women in your arms. Don't you think about it." F*CKU hashtag yin%%. Hero cursed. Ronan's character was gloomy. Although he didn't speak, but he looked at Dean. Dean frowned and looked at the two burly men. "How did you take care of them?" Both of them were scared and didn't know how to answer. Noyce shouted, "I asked you to take care of them every day. Didn't you hear me?" Both of them trembled as they told how they had tortured them. Dean glanced at the props on the wall. Most of them were stained with blood. As they said, Hero and Ronan had tasted the torture tools. He shook his head. "It's just physical pain. It's nothing." Noyce saw that Dean was dissatisfied. He carefully asked, "Master, what do you mean? Take the cigarettes that Richelieu likes. Light 5 of them every day." Dean said, "Go to the prison and find 100 strong men. You know what to do." Chapter 725. Hero and Ronan's faces changed as they heard Dean's words. The anger in their eyes turned into fear. They were the military gods of the inner wall, so they knew the prison environment as well as their own bedrooms. They knew what Dean meant. You. Hero's body trembled in anger. His heart was about to explode. At this moment, he wanted to use all his hatred to kill Dean, or pray to God to use all his life to strangle Dean. He couldn't imagine what would happen if 100 able-bodied men came. Would the dignified army gods suffer from this inhuman torture? Even if Dean doubled the torture, he wouldn't be afraid. But at this moment, he was afraid, and at the same time, he was more resentful than before. How is it? Dean looked at both of them and asked again. Hero's face turned ugly. He clenched his teeth as his mind was in a fierce struggle. Luonon lowered his head. After a moment of silence, he suddenly looked up and said, "I'm willing to cooperate with you." "Ronan, you." Hero looked at him in anger. Ronan didn't look at him, but looked at Dean. "I'm willing to cooperate with you. I'm sincere. I can betray the military." Dean indifferently said, "In that case, show me your sincerity." I want to know all the information you know about the military. The number of soldiers, strength, and the areas where the military is stationed, and so on. Of course, I want to know the residences of the 3 supreme commanders, as well as their magic marks abilities and all the information about them. Don't even think about it. Hero roared. Dean stretched out a finger and moved it slightly. Noyce understood and winked at the 2 burly men. The 2 immediately grabbed the blockage and stuffed it into Hero's mouth again. Then, they tied his mouth with a rope so that he couldn't spit it out. Ronan listened to Hero struggle. Although he knew Hero was trying to stop him, he did not turn around. He said in a low voice, "If I tell you, will you let me go? I can think about it." Ronan stared at him, took a deep breath, and said, "All right, I'll tell you." Dean extracted a lot of useful and valuable information after listening to Ronan's words. Although he knew that the information might be false, but at least it could be used as a reference. "Seeing that you're so sincere, I won't increase your sentence." Dean looked at Noyce, 100 strong men. "Hand them over to Hero." Noyce bowed his head. Hero's eyes widened as he looked at Dean in horror. He desperately screamed and shook his head. There was a pleading look in his eyes as he wanted to speak. Dudian glanced at Ronan. He didn't see any reaction from Ronan. His body didn't show any signs of tension. Dudian believed in Ronan's words. He turned around and left the dungeon. He didn't ask Hero to verify the information. "Master, are you really going to let Ronan go? If he takes the opportunity to escape back to the inner wall, then all the information you got will be invalid." Noyce looked at Dean as they left the dungeon. Dean shook his head. "They are not ordinary people. They can't be subdued by intimidation. They have grievances in their hearts and can't be resolved. As long as there is an opportunity, they will never miss it. How can I let people who will throw stones at me when I am down to be free and unfettered?" Noyce agreed with Dean's style. "Master, are you going to kill them? Anyway, they have got everything they know. It's useless to keep them alive." "No, the living are more important than the dead." Dean looked at him. "You will personally supervise this matter. I want to completely destroy their faith and everything they hold on to. Don't blindly use torture. There are many things that are more unbearable than pain." Noyce saw a trace of reproach in Dean's eyes. He knew that Dean wasn't satisfied with what he told the 2 to take care of them. He didn't ask about the purpose, but said in a serious tone, "I know, Master." Dean didn't say much. Although Noyce was one of the trustworthy people around him, but he would occasionally whip him to make Noyce feel awe and not arrogant. Time flew by. In the blink of an eye, the corpses had raged for a month. There were originally 23 cities in the inner wall. However, they were reduced to 12 in just a month. Almost half of them were destroyed. All the survivors were transported by the military to live in the cities that were cleared out. The reason why there were 12 cities was that there was an earl in each of the 12 cities. The cities and their territories were so large that they could accommodate millions of refugees. Their defenses were extremely strong. With pioneers in charge and the protection of the army, they barely suffered any losses in the chaos of corpses. Instead, they made a lot of money. Moreover, the drawings of the underground tunnels were in the hands of the Earl's General Affairs Director. Outsiders could only get some fragments of the drawings, which were useless. So Dean's poisoning didn't involve the 12 Earl cities. This led to the 12 Earl cities becoming the largest concentration of refugees. These refugees weren't without wealth. There were some rich merchants, viscounts, and barons among them. The plan to clean up the zombies was mainly focused on the 12 Earls' mansions, restoring the 12 cities to peace and tranquility. However, the streets were stained with blood everywhere, and it was difficult to wash them clean. The remaining 11 cities have been occupied by the undeads. In addition to the undeads, there were many animals that had been bitten by the undeads. All of them had mutated into bloodthirsty monsters. While the army was recovering the land, the Mystic Sect and the 3 devil families were also actively sending experts to encircle the pioneer-level undeads that appeared in various places. Once these undeads were exposed, the military would immediately put them on the wanted list, and they would even issue a sky-high bounty for them. On the Demon Dragon clan's Holy Maiden Peak, Hathaway was practicing her spear arts with a giant spear in the square. She was swinging her spear as she listened to the important news reported by the female officer beside her. At this time, a figure came from outside the square. It was the pale-faced, middle-aged man. Chapter 726. She finally decided to let me guard the wasteland. Hathaway shook her arm as she put the spear on the ground. She looked at the middle-aged man. Did Dragon Mother find a target for me to go to the kingdom of God? She has found a suitable target since she let you guard the wasteland. Oh, Hathaway smiled softly and said, in the heart of our grandmother, Dragon Mother, everything is for the sake of the overall situation. She wouldn't have let you live until now if she didn't. The pale-faced, middle-aged man was very direct. It's not that easy to guard the wasteland. You've seen it the last time you went there. In the depths of the Red Wasteland, terrifying monsters can jump out at any time and attack the stronghold. You have to fight and defend that place. Survival there depends entirely on luck. No matter how strong you are, it's meaningless. Hathaway didn't care and said, since it depends on luck, then there's nothing to worry about. It's useless to worry anyway. The middle-aged man was speechless. I have told Dragon Mother about the corpses. It is absolutely the little devil from the outer wall. Hathaway turned the topic back to the middle-aged man. I sent Eleanor to the outer wall, and she became an undead. I don't believe that she was bitten by other undead. The number of pioneer-level undead is small, and she has been missing for so long. I think it is likely that she spread the virus. It is obvious. I don't know why Dragon Mother doesn't believe it. Didn't the military send 2 military gods to the outer wall? They've been missing for so long. Isn't it enough to explain the problem? This virus is clearly the work of the outer wall. It's the fault of the inner wall. We have no time to take care of them. This must be the idea of that stinky brat. He's very black and will do anything. However, my sister actually agreed to it. I've really underestimated her. The middle-aged man shook his head. It is not certain whether that person is your sister or not. As for the virus, Dragon Mother should have her own considerations. The inner wall is in chaos. Although the monastery, the military, and the devil families have tried to encircle the undead, but no one knows who is behind the virus. Aristotle has gone to the kingdom of God. It is a sensitive period. Even if Dragon Mother has evidence that the virus came from the outer wall, she won't easily take it out. Hathaway showed a contemptuous smile. Because of this, we humans are still living in the giant wall after hundreds of years. We can't go out of the wall. Such a wall exists in everyone's heart. The middle-aged man sighed. People inside the wall are eager to go out, and people outside the wall are eager to come in. They build a wall in their heart to protect themselves, but at the same time imprison themselves. But they can't blame anyone. The outside world is too dangerous. If we leave the giant wall, then we won't even have a home. Hathaway's eyes flashed. If I become an abyss walker, then I can go to the world outside the giant wall. There is no place that can stop me. The middle-aged man looked at her and shook his head. This is too far away. We don't have the formula of the abyss in the giant wall. If you want to become an abyss walker, then it is almost impossible unless your bloodline has awakened to the 7th degree. Hathaway disagreed. 7 degree is 7 degree. Sooner or later, I will reach it. The middle-aged man smiled, but didn't refute her. He knew that even if Aisha had awakened once since birth, she may not be able to complete the 7th awakening in her lifetime. One must know that the ancestor of the dragon clan who had awakened the 6th awakening was even more enchanting. Not only had he awakened when he was 10 years old, but he had already awakened the 3rd time. But for the rest of his life, he could barely reach the 6th awakening. He couldn't go any further. This time, it's a good opportunity to encircle the pioneer level walking dead. Hathaway said thoughtfully, they don't care about the outer wall, but they don't know that there is a sinister little devil there. I will never let him succeed. He wants to take advantage of the chaos in the inner wall to get a chance to breathe. Humph, he underestimates me too much. The middle-aged man frowned. Miss, what are you going to do? To encircle the undead. But they didn't say where they're going to encircle the undead. Besides, if the undead runs to the outer wall, then we have to do our duty and chase after it so that it doesn't harm the innocent civilians of the outer wall. In the depths of the Dragon Clan's main peak, there was a cave similar to a natural karst cave. The walls were red and filled with heat waves. The temperature in the air was extremely high. The inner side of the rock wall was like a living creature's skin. It was densely covered with red veins. Bright red liquid, like magma, flowed slowly into the ground and converged into the huge rock pool in the center of the cave. In the monotonous rock pool, there was a snow-white color. It was a beautiful woman with creamy skin. She wore a bright golden laurel crown, looking graceful and graceful. She quietly closed her eyes and sank into the rock pool. White mist curled around her, covering her face and making it faintly discernible. At this time, an old woman came from the dark tunnel outside the cave with a lantern. She stopped outside the rock pool. Her withered white hair curled in the heat wave. Sweat oozed from her forehead and evaporated immediately. She respectfully said, "Miss, there is a reply. The person in the outer wall is indeed Miss Aisha, but her state seems to be a bit wrong. It is suspected that she has been infected with a virus and has become an undead." The beautiful woman in the rock pool opened her eyes slightly, revealing a pair of eyes that were as tranquil and deep as a lake. She slowly said, "Did he go to see it himself?" "Yes." The old woman lowered her head. Kirijan also said that Miss Aisha seems to be under someone's control. She listens to a youth, but the youth is very polite and respectful to Miss Aisha. The beautiful woman's eyes were as calm as the lake. Let Kirijan kill him and bring Aisha back. The old woman's face turned strange. "Miss, Kirijan also said that he can't assassinate the youth if you want him to. He said that his strength is low and he may not be able to kill the youth. Instead, he will behead the youth before Miss Aisha can react." The beautiful woman frowned. "He is ranked 3rd on the assassin list. Can't he kill a youth?" The old woman smiled. "I also asked him. He said that the youth's strength is close to the top 10 military gods. Moreover, he is very cautious. Apart from Miss Aisha, even his most trusted subordinates can't take the initiative to get close to him." "Oh." There is a trace of fluctuation in the beautiful woman's eyes. "What is the origin of this youth?" Even the youngest of the 10 military gods were in their early 20s. Unless it was a genius like Aisha who had a great background and resources, no one could reach the pinnacle of the outer wilderness in their youth. "I heard from Miss Haley that this youth is the poor boy from the outer wall who caused Miss Aisha to lose her sanest position. He was born in the dust. He is the lowest class of people even in the outer wall." The old woman felt a bit strange. He became a limitless individual after he joined the Dragon Clan's Dragon Guards. I didn't expect him to become a pioneer in such a short time. Moreover, he is close to the level of the top 10 military gods. I'm afraid that there are a lot of secrets hidden in his body. There must be someone behind him. The beautiful woman's brows drooped. After a while, she said, "Investigate his identity." "Yes," Mississippi, the old woman agreed. Seeing that she didn't say anything else, she cautiously said, "Miss, since Kirijan can't do it, should we send the person ranked 1st on the killer list?" The woman closed her eyes and moved her lips, but her voice was very calm. "There is no need. Even the number 1 assassin on the list can barely assassinate the war god. He is an executioner trained by the winged race. He will not work for us." The old woman said, "It seems that we have to send a real master. We will discuss this matter later." The beautiful woman didn't want to say more. The old woman realized that the beautiful woman didn't have the intention to kill for the time being. It seemed that the beautiful woman intended to investigate the youth's background first. The old woman immediately retreated and prepared to leave this hot place as soon as possible. Outer wall, St. Mark's Square. A big and a small figure were flashing in the square. They collided with each other from time to time. Their hands are holding 2 wooden swords. Dean was holding 2 wooden swords in his hands. He fiercely hacked the slender figure. The girl was Aurora. After a month of training, Riley had taught her a lot of swordsmanship. After the injection of God's blessing, her physique was already at the level of primary hunter. This was not because Dean was saving resources. If he wanted to, he could even train her to the level of limitless within this month. But too high a physique was not a good thing, especially for the initial fighting training. Just the basic skills needed repeated practice. The real training of basic skills, in addition to correcting the posture of the body, was more important to train the willpower. The stronger the body, the more difficult it was to train the willpower. Training hard when one's physique was weak would instead temper one's willpower, making it as tenacious as steel. In addition, there was another reason. If there was no parasitic soulworm, relying on God's blessing alone could only improve the body to the level of hunter. Clang! The wooden sword in Aurora's hand was knocked away. Her wrist that was holding the sword was red. Aurora's face turned ugly as she saw the wooden sword fly away. She bit her lower lip and went forward to pick up the wooden sword. She used her red and swollen hand to grasp the sword. She turned to look at Dean. Dean put away the two swords and took the towel from Noyce. He wiped his sweat. Let Riley accompany you to practice more. I'll tell him that you don't need to be merciful. Aurora slightly bit her teeth as she clenched the wooden sword in her hand. She lowered her head and didn't speak. Dean looked at her but didn't comfort her. He just shook his head and went back to the temple. Today he was interested in testing Aurora's level. The results surprised him, although he was disappointed in the end, but he was very surprised in his heart. In just a month of training, Aurora's combat ability was comparable to the majority of hunters. This was an incredible thing. It was not an exaggeration to say that she was a combat genius. Such an astonishing rate of improvement made him feel a little ashamed. Thinking about all these years, even though his physique had improved by leaps and bounds, his combat ability hadn't improved that quickly. Apart from his archery skills, his close combat skills seemed a little weak. In fact, he knew that this was something he couldn't do anything about. At first, he practiced archery hard and had amazing progress. But later, he was imprisoned in prison. There was no environment to practice archery, so he gradually neglected it. After he was released from prison, he could only rely on his strong physique to slowly restore his archery skills to the original level. But the level was not high. It was just at the hunter level. Later, he got the Dragon Clan's Dragon Thorn chapter. Most of the records were various kinds of spear skills. He practiced for a period of time and had a small progress in spear skills. He also realized his own way of spear skills. As a result, his physique had skyrocketed and he had mastered the splitter's complete body. His whole body had turned into a sharp blade. His fighting style was biased towards the sword type, so he had to practice with the sword to enhance his fighting ability. He had changed his fighting style several times, but his fighting style had become weaker. At least it couldn't be compared with other pioneers. At the time when he was helping the male corpse in the inner wall area, a winged pioneer whose physique was obviously weaker than him had struggled several times and almost let him escape. He felt that his archery skills should be one of the best in the entire inner wall area if he could change his fighting style. If he could keep practicing his spear skills, it was estimated that his spear skills could be upgraded to the pioneer level. At least it would be comparable to the Wing family's spear skills. My short life can't afford too many delays and detours. Dean sighed in his heart. Now he had decided to practice his swordsmanship to the end. He must improve his swordsmanship to the level of other pioneers. Fortunately, he had been practicing carving with his right hand for years. He had a deeper understanding of the flexibility of the body and the clever use of strength. He felt that this kind of understanding of strength was the foundation of fighting. No matter what weapon it was only the appearance. But the technique could be applied to all moves as long as he mastered the way of using different weapons. Chapter 727. Report back to the chairman. Our people have infiltrated into the cities of the 12 Earls of the Inner Wall. According to your plan, we have secretly bribed the civilians of the Inner Wall to spread the rumors. At present, 9 of the cities are in a mess because of the rumors. The people in the cities of the remaining 3 Earls were accidentally exposed and executed. But they didn't find us, a short, middle-aged man reported to Dudian. Dudian nodded. Tell them that the corpses are caused by the Monster Research Institute. The military and the monastery are the culprits. It's just a conspiracy for them to shelter the refugees. They will be secretly caught by the Monster Research Institute and dissected at any time. If necessary, let them create several experimental accidents for the people of the shelter to see. Pay attention to hide your identity. The middle-aged man was startled. Yes, Chairman. Go. Dudian waved his hand to let him leave. The middle-aged man and the people who helped him in the inner wall were elites selected from the Dark Church. Although their strength wasn't good, and they were at the hunter level, but they were treacherous and cruel. They were suitable for this kind of thing. Dudian was different from others. He only focused on the character. Strength was the second criterion. Although he didn't have many confidants, but there were a lot of people who worked for him. Noyce looked at Dudian after the middle-aged man left. Master, the gunpowder made by the alchemist camp has been buried in the sighing wall. But the current amount is only enough to destroy a small gap in the wall. Tell them to hurry up and continue production. Dudian said. The Dark Church had been integrated. The 12 districts had been merged into 6 major divisions. The top alchemists of each district had formed the alchemist camp, and the potion pharmacists had formed the potion pharmacist camp. They were 2 sharp swords in his hand to cope with the upcoming war. Master, the saltpeter mines in our hands are almost finished. The rest of the saltpeter mines are in the hands of the nobles. Do you want to buy them from them? Noyce knew that Dudian attached great importance to this matter. What if they don't agree to buy? Then let them agree. Dudian's answer was very simple. Noyce understood what he meant and nodded without saying anything else. With Dean's permission, he could do whatever he wanted to do. Dudian came to the dungeon and looked at Hero and Ronan, who were shackled in chains. Both of them looked more miserable than the last time he saw them. Their bodies were naked and their armor had been stripped off. Their bodies were covered in blood. Their hair was scattered and their heads were hanging down. They looked like corpses hanging on chains. Hundreds of burly men were living in the cells next to the dungeon. They were selected from the military and Thornflower prison. More than half of them were lechers who had committed obscenities. Most of their targets were beautiful women and children. There were even some who liked old women and children. There were only a few who liked men. Dean smelled the strong stench of semen in the air as soon as he arrived at the dungeon. It was not the authentic old era cigarette, but a special kind of cigarette made of poison. It was highly addictive. Both of them had been passively infected with drug addiction for a long time. Did you take care of them today? Dudian asked. The 2 strong men in charge of the execution were trembling with fear. They nervously replied, Not yet. Then what are you waiting for? Both of them replied, Yes, Elder. They took out the whip from the wall and whipped the 2 men. The 2 of them were awakened and immediately screamed like frightened mice. Their eyes, covered by their messy hair, were filled with fear and pleading. Hero shouted, Don't hit me, don't hit me. As he screamed, the 2 of them whipped him again and again. Dudian quietly looked at them. After a while, he raised his hand to signal them to stop. He came in front of them. What do you think? Hero's screams stopped as he heard Dean's voice. He looked up at Dean, but there was no resentment in his eyes. Instead, there was fear. Please kill me. I beg you. I'm willing to do anything you want me to do. Please kill me. Dean raised his hand to touch his hair, but found that his hair was stuck into bundles, exuding the stench of semen. He immediately retracted his hand and calmly said, If I kill you, my efforts will be in vain. Are you 2 willing to fight for me? I'm willing. I'm willing. Hero shouted out loud as Dudian's words fell. There was no trace of hesitation in his voice. Ronan also said, I'm willing. I'm willing to help you kill the people from the military as long as you let us leave this place. Although his expression was calm, but his words were very serious. There was a trace of urgency and desire in the depths of his eyes. Dudian didn't expect that their consciousness would be so fragile in such a short period of time. It seemed that drugs and the destruction of dignity were enough to completely destroy a person. In other words, either of the 2 could completely defeat a person. He had the concept that people were very fragile for a long time. Whether it was a hunter or a pioneer, their weakness was equally fatal. In that case, you will cooperate with me to complete an experiment. You will follow me from now on, Dudeen said. Hero's body trembled slightly, and tears flowed out. His expression looked like he was crying tears of joy, but there was also a sad and desperate feeling of self-pity. Ronan was silent and lowered his head. Dudeen asked the supervisor next to him to untie their shackles and take them to wash their bodies. After a while, the two finished washing and changed into a set of clean clothes. Dudeen took them to the side hall at the top of the mountain, which was also his alchemy laboratory. There were all kinds of strange materials, and the largest object was a chariot made entirely of metal in the center of the laboratory. The black body of the chariot exuded an ancient aura, and the outer edge of the chariot's wheels protruded with ferocious spikes. These spikes were of different curvatures and lengths, and if one looked closely, they would discover that these were the sharp horns of unknown monsters. The bottom of the chariot was connected to several dark ropes that hung upside down on the back of the chariot. Dudeen came to the side of the chariot and asked Noise to carry Hero to the laboratory table. He put on sterile gloves and took out a scalpel. He pressed Hero's head and whispered, "It's a little painful. Bear with it." Hero was obviously scared. What are you going to do?" "It's just a small experiment." Dean took the anesthetic and injected it into Hero's back. Then he cut Hero's back. The scalpel rotated between his fingers as if he was carving a work of art. He cut Hero's back layer by layer along the fiber texture. Soon the skin on his back was completely peeled off. The flesh was rolled up, revealing a centipede-like slender back. Dean narrowed his eyes and took the chain hanging from the chariot. With the help of the scalpel, he slowly implanted the chain and tied it to his spine. Half an hour later, the operation was completed. Hero's back had been stitched up, and the stitches on his skin were extremely neat, like clothes sewn by an excellent tailor. However, there was a chain protruding from the skin of his cervical vertebrae, and this chain penetrated deep into his flesh. Dudeen grabbed the healing powder from the side and smeared it on Hero's back. He poured out 2 small red pills and put them in Hero's mouth. "Eat it." Hero hesitated but didn't dare to resist. He licked his mouth and swallowed. Hero's wounds quickly healed after taking the healing medicine, especially the wounds on his back. It was almost visible that the skin and flesh were slowly glued together. New flesh was growing in the gaps. Dudeen estimated that it would take at least 3 hours for Hero's wounds to fully heal. In addition to the healing medicine made by the top potion maker, it was also due to his own self-healing ability. 3 hours passed. During this time, Dean was fiddling with the chariot. The wound on Hero's back was almost healed. He removed the thread on Hero's back and let him stand up, take 2 steps. Hero tentatively walked down the experiment table. At this moment, the tendons in his feet and hands had also healed. Perhaps because he hadn't walked for too long, his walking posture was a bit rusty. Every step he took, there was a tinkling sound. Hero looked back and was stunned. The chain on his back was connected to the bottom of the chariot. He was like a horse that was tied to the chariot. "From now on, this is your nest," Dudeen said to him. "Try and see if you can pull my chariot." Hero turned to look at Dudeen. 2 lines of tears gushed out. He roared in grief and angrily punched the table. He roared like an angry beast and rushed towards Dudeen. Dean's eyes were slightly cold. The moment he approached, he suddenly kicked out and kicked the man's chest, causing him to fly out. Although Hero was at the peak of the wilderness level, he had been imprisoned for many days and was seriously injured. At the moment, his hands and feet had just regained their mobility. His strength was not as good as before. Dean stamped his feet and jumped onto the chariot. He put his hands on the metal platform and pressed one of the buttons. "Ah!" Hero screamed and twitched on the ground. He was like a fish that had jumped ashore. Dean tapped again, and the button popped up. He quietly looked at Hero. "You have no choice, unless you would rather go back to the previous days." Hero stopped twitching and gasped for breath. His hands were still trembling. He stood up shakily and looked at the youth on the chariot. His eyes were full of resentment, but there was even more fear. He shouted, "Then let me go back to the days before. I'd rather stay in the dungeon than work for you. Didn't you say that you were willing to do anything?" Dudian lightly said, "You have to keep your words." Hero was sad and indignant. He thought that Dudian wanted him to fight for Dudian. If that was the case, then he could take the opportunity to escape back to the inner wall. But Dudian had tied him to such a chariot. It was clear that Dudian intended to enslave him forever until he died. He would rather return to those hellish, dark days and completely abandon his dignity when he thought about how he would have to risk his life for this man who he hated to the point of insanity. You devil! Hero wanted to cry, but he couldn't. He was numb to the hatred in his heart. There was only regret in his heart. Why did he come to the outer wall and enter the temple? Dudian indifferently said, "The experiment has been completed. It's impossible for you to go back to the previous days. But as long as you are obedient and fight for me, then at least you can survive. If you hate me and would rather be humiliated than work for me, then I can only let you take off your clothes and pull the chariot to the inner wall. Let your loved ones, your children, or your parents see what you look like. Oh yes, there is no need for that thing in your crotch to exist anymore." Hero was so angry that his hair almost stood up. He stared at Dean like a berserk beast, but Dean didn't care and still had an indifferent face. He wanted to kill Dudian with his eyes. If thoughts could kill, then he would have destroyed Dudian into dust. But nothing happened, even though he stared at Dudian for a long time. His eyes were drier than before. His heart was full of bitterness. The hatred slowly receded. It was like a person who couldn't maintain ecstasy for a long time. He couldn't fall into anger for a long time either. Hatred and anger were like waves. They rolled to the climax and then gradually subsided. Once again, he deeply understood what it meant to live a life worse than death. He also understood what it meant to be happy now, because there would be even worse situations in the future. He suddenly felt that the days in the dungeon were nothing. If Dean really wanted to castrate him and expose his ugliness in front of the people he loved the most, then he wouldn't have to worry about it. Accepting your fate is a kind of courage. What do you think? Dudian said. Hero lowered his head. He was so sad that he couldn't cry. He squatted on the ground. Dudian looked at Ronan, who was sitting in the corner. "It's your turn." Ronan's face turned ugly. He clenched his fists. He wanted to commit suicide, but his sharp fingertips touched his neck. He was full of fear. Dean looked calm as he saw the struggle in Ronan's eyes. After a period of humiliation and torture, their willpower wasn't the same as before. They were even more fragile than ordinary people. It took courage to commit suicide. Hope was an evil thing. As long as a person saw a glimmer of hope, they would crave for that glimmer of hope, even if they knew that there was a greater possibility of facing a worse situation. Chapter 728. Dean picked up Ronan and threw him to another table. Ronan did not resist. He closed his eyes in pain, still fighting a psychological battle. Dean applied anesthetics to him and took the scalpel. He skillfully cut the skin on his back. He cut layer by layer like peeling garlic. After the back was exposed, he took the chain from the tank and wrapped it around his spine. Then he began to suture. The whole process was very smooth. Hero squatted on the ground. He saw that Ronan didn't make a sound. His eyes were full of sadness. He couldn't help but sob like a wronged child. Dean wiped his hands after the operation was finished. "I'll give you back your freedom, and your loved ones will be safe when I become the master of the inner wall." The two of them were silent, dejected as if they had accepted their fate. Dean left the temple and asked Noyce to send food to both of them. He didn't worry that they would resist or escape. He just hoped that they could restore their strength as soon as possible. Another day passed in the blink of an eye. Dean finished his breakfast and was about to ask about the situation of the inner wall. Noyce rushed into the temple. "Master, it's not good. There is news from the observation tower that someone is coming out of the inner wall. It seems that they are coming towards us." Dean's heart turned cold. The observation tower he built could transmit the situation of the wall in real time. Each tower was equipped with the latest 10x telescope. The hunters on the observation tower had a visual range of about 5,000 meters. Although 5,000 meters couldn't be compared with the distance between the Psi Wall and Utopia Mountain. However, there weren't only one observation tower, but more than a dozen of them. It was like the beacon tower in ancient China. The observation tower would make a mark when it saw the enemy. The second observation tower would monitor the first tower and then give the information. Dean could synchronize the latest information. Since noise came to report to him, it meant that the people from the inner wall had passed through the side wall. What is the specific information? Dean asked. More than a month had passed. He was worried that the inner wall would react and launch a large-scale attack. According to the news, there are 12 people riding 2 giant eagles. Noise said concisely. Dean's face changed. 12 people. Were there 12 pioneers? Get ready immediately. Activate the first-level defense plan. Dean quickly made a decision. He was not only worried about the possibility of 12 pioneers, but also that if this possibility was true, it meant that there was a strong inner Baron-level leader among the 12 pioneers, which was the biggest threat. Yes, Noise immediately turned and ran. Dean estimated the flying speed of the eagle. He knew that they only had 3 minutes to prepare. He rushed out of the temple and went to the side hall. He took out some bottles of medicine from the cabinet. 2 of them were powder. He poured the powder on Hero and Ronan, who were leaning against the chariot. Both of them were inexplicable, but soon recognized that the powder was used to cover up the smell. Hero asked, "Did someone from the inner wall come?" Dudian replied, "There are more than a dozen of them, riding giant eagles. They should be people from the military." Hero and Ronan were startled. They looked at each other with a complicated expression. Dean took 2 masks from the side and threw them to both of them. "You have to help me in the fight. If it doesn't work, then we can only escape back to the temple. There is a secret passage under the temple that leads to the bottom of the mountain. I will give you a hand gesture, and you will rush back to the temple with me." Both of them looked at each other, but didn't make a sound. They took the headgear in their hands and slowly put it on their heads. Dean took out another bottle from the cabinet and poured out 3 purple pills. He swallowed one and threw the other 2 to Hero and Ronan. "This is the antidote." Both of them saw Dean eat it, so they didn't doubt him. Anyway, Dean could easily kill them, so they also ate it. But in their hearts, they realized that Dean would probably use poison in the next battle. Sinister boy. Both of them thought, but didn't show any change in their expressions. "They are coming." Dean looked up at the sky and quickly rushed out of the side hall. Hero and Ronan followed Dean's line of sight. After a moment, they saw 2 huge shadows flying over from the horizon. Both of them were shocked. Their perception was 1 step slower than Dean's. They were at the peak of the outer wilderness. Although they weren't good at perception, they weren't inferior to the average perception-type pioneers. Thinking of this, both of them looked at the thin back of the youth standing at the door and felt a chill. This youth was more terrible than they had imagined. He didn't only know how to use tricks. Both of them didn't know that Dean didn't sense the arrival of the enemies. He calculated the time of the giant eagle's flight, and they were almost there. Sure enough, there are 2 giant eagles. Dean squinted his eyes when he saw the 2 huge black spots in the sky. He knew that the information was right. There were 12 people standing on the eagles, and they were probably pioneers. 12 pioneers were dispatched to kill him at the same time. What a big move. Even the Dragon Clan's fortress in the wasteland only had 7 or 8 pioneers guarding it all year round. Dean's eyes were cold and full of killing intent. He clenched his fists. He didn't expect the battle to come so soon. Moreover, it was like a thunderbolt, leaving no room for negotiation. As they got closer, Dean gradually saw the figures on the back of the giant eagles. There were exactly 12 of them, and they were emitting exuberant heat. They were all pioneers. The last glimmer of hope in his heart was dashed. The worst news was that 3 of the heat sources were stronger than the other 10 pioneers. They were comparable to Hero and Ronan. Do I have to ask her for help? Dean thought of Aisha. She was his last life-saving charm. Judging from the current situation, it wouldn't be difficult to solve this crisis if Aisha took action. However, Aisha had to enter the demonic body to deal with so many people. Once she lost control, it would be very difficult to control her. What worried him the most was that if she took action with all her strength, her body might mutate into new tissues like the male corpse, and she would never be able to return to the appearance of a human again. While these thoughts were churning in his mind, his pupils suddenly shrank. Two thick, murderous auras shot out from his eyes as he stared directly at the person on the back of one of the giant eagles. This person was one of the 3 strongest heat sources. She wore a set of dark green soft armor and held a giant spear in her hand. Her face was peerlessly beautiful. It was a face that he would never forget for the rest of his life. It was also a face that he hated to the bone. Hathaway. It was her. She came in person. Dean was waiting for the right time to kill the Dragon Clan by himself. He didn't expect that she would come to the outer wall and take the initiative to come to him. He clenched his fingers so tightly that his knuckles cracked. The silent killing intent in his body burst out like a flood, causing his eyes to bulge slightly and his pupils to heat up. Every pore on his body opened up and spurted out angry hot air. Every strand of his hair seemed to be standing up and exploding. Die, die, die. Chapter 729. At this time, Hathaway on the giant eagle seemed to have noticed Dean. Her watery eyes moved slightly, and she looked down at Dean, whose eyes were full of killing intent. At this moment, both of them were staring at each other, as if the space between them did not exist at all. Then, the corner of her mouth slightly curled up. The tyrannical aura in Dean's eyes instantly became strong, and the strong killing intent made his handsome face distorted. He stared at her. Whoosh, whoosh. The giant eagle flapped its wings, and the whistling sound of flying became clearer. The 2 giant eagles flew over the square in a blink of an eye, like 2 dark clouds floating over, blocking the morning sun, and reflecting 2 huge shadows on the square. The Knights of Light who were guarding outside the square looked up at this scene with their mouths wide open, dumbstruck. Barton, who had just finished his breakfast and was about to come over to greet Dean, was standing in the corridor looking at the 2 giant eagles above his head. He could even see the sharp claws below the eagles, which were as sharp as iron hooks, glowing with cold luster. 2 eagle cries sounded, and the giant eagles landed on the square. The wind rolled up, and the dust swept towards Dean. Dean stared at Hathaway, who was standing on the head of the eagle, without blinking. Her appearance was exactly the same as when he first saw her. The green soft armor was her favorite color. She had a harmless smile on her face, as if she was meeting an old acquaintance. The killing intent in Dean's heart could not be contained, which made him crazy, but his brain was extraordinarily calm, so that his face still maintained an angry and ferocious expression, showing uncontrollable killing intent. Hathaway looked at Dean's appearance, covered her mouth, and chuckled. "You look so fierce. Are you going to eat me?" Dean gritted his teeth and said word by word, "Your meat is rotten. I will only marinate you and feed you to the dogs." "Shut up," a young man in armor shouted from the giant eagle next to him, and he angrily rebuked Dean. "Who do you think you are? How dare you talk to Princess Hathaway like this? Do you know who she is? Kowtow to her 3 times and apologize. Otherwise, I'll make sure your head falls to the ground." Dean's eyes were gloomy as he looked at him. "Who the hell are you?" Master didn't say anything, but you are shouting. "You're courting death." The young man was furious. He jumped up from the giant eagle and flew over like a rock. After landing on the ground, he rushed toward Dean like a sharp sword. He put his palms behind his back, and the moment he approached, he pulled out a sword and stabbed Dean's throat. Scram! The killing intent in Dean's heart could not be suppressed. He roared and instantly erupted with anger. The bones on his arm bulged as he punched. Bang! The fist collided with the sharp sword. The sharp sword pierced the fist, and the fist followed the blade of the sword all the way forward until it hit the hilt. The anger in the young man's eyes suddenly disappeared, and there was a trace of astonishment. He found that his sword was fixed and could not move. At the same time, Dean's other fist smashed into the young man's face. Crack! The young man's long sword fell out of his hand, and his body flew upside down, smashed on the ground, slid for dozens of meters, and rolled in front of the giant eagle's claws. There was no sound. A huge hole appeared on his face, and he died on the spot. Dean had retracted his fist, and a 20-centimeter long, white bone spur protruded from his fist, slowly retracted back into his body. As for the sword in his other fist, as he loosened his fist, the sword did not pierce into his fist, but pierced through the gap between his fingers, only cutting a little bit of his arm. It was precisely because of this that he used his fingers to clamp the sword and fix it in place. The people on the giant eagle looked at the scene that happened in a flash. They did not react until the young man bumped into the eagle's claws. Seeing that he was dead, they were all dumbfounded, and their faces were full of astonishment and disbelief. This young man was a pioneer, but he was killed by a punch. For a time, the eyes of the people looking at Dean were no longer relaxed and indifferent, but revealed a dignified look. Although the young man did not use the devil body and carelessly attacked, Dean could kill him, which was enough to prove that he was also a pioneer. However, judging from the heat source on Dean's body, he was just a primary frontiersman. Hathaway was also surprised. She remembered that when she first met Dean outside the giant wall, he was just a little hunter. Later, he was sent to the dragon family to become a dragon guard and received resources to cultivate, but he was only a frontiersman. She did not expect that when they met again, Dean had become a pioneer at the same level as her. "Your Royal Highness, is this the rebel that you said was disturbing the outer wall?" A slender woman on the giant eagle asked Hathaway. Hathaway nodded slightly. The monastery should have mentioned it. The military also knows that the outer wall has been occupied by someone who is trying to establish himself as the king. Moreover, he is related to the recent outbreak of ptomaine in the inner wall. Our dragon family has evidence that shows that he is probably the one who is controlling the ptomaine. This person must be eliminated. However, it is not that simple here. In addition to him, there should be other strong people in charge. Everyone be careful and don't underestimate the enemy. Yes, I heard that our military has sent 2 gods of war, but they haven't returned to the inner wall yet. It is estimated that they are in a bad situation. Everyone should be careful. Another burly middle-aged man said in a deep voice. There was a special cross pattern on his armor. It was the symbol of the military's armor. The rest of the people were surprised as they heard his words. They didn't expect that the 2 gods of war of the military would die here. They suddenly understood why Hathaway would invite so many pioneers to come to such a barren place like the outer wall. In addition to him, I can't feel other strong people. It should be someone who is good at hiding. A youth with burn marks on his face said. His eyes were purple and flashing with strange light. Hathaway looked around, and her eyes suddenly fell on the temple. She looked at Dean. "My sister is there. I can feel it. Don't let her hide." Dean stared at her coldly, but he was a little surprised in his heart. He didn't expect that she could perceive Aisha. Aisha's current state, even a pioneer who was good at perception, might not be able to perceive her, just like the previous young man with a burn on his face. "If you want to see, then why don't you go in and see? Are you afraid of your sister?" Dean stared at her. Chapter 730. If you didn't sneak attack your sister in the wasteland, how could she be hurt by the Corpse King? Dean didn't answer her words, but showed an angry expression and roared. "Since you are here today, don't think about leaving." Hathaway frowned as she threw a glance at the shrine subconsciously. She had taken a great risk to come here today. After all, her elder sister was many times more powerful than her. Although she didn't want to admit it, she couldn't change the fact. Therefore, she especially called other pioneers of the corpse exterminating team to join hands to kill her. She believed that without the blood vessel, her sister couldn't enter the demonic body state, and her strength would be greatly reduced. She may not be able to defeat her. Moreover, there were 2 pioneers at the peak of the outer wasteland. They had a great chance to kill Aisha. However, this plan was good, but it couldn't be sloppy. Aisha hadn't shown up since she appeared, but her feeling would not be wrong. Aisha was in the temple. Was she planning to attack when he least expected it? Hathaway's eyes narrowed. She didn't dare to act rashly. She thought for a moment and said to a bald middle-aged man next to her, "Magic Scorpion War God, you deal with this untouchable who disturbs the rules of the outer wasteland. After dealing with him, we will act together." No problem. The bald, middle-aged man agreed without thinking. Although Dean had killed the pioneer with one punch, people with discerning eyes could see that the youth was careless and rashly attacked without entering the demonic body state, so he was caught off guard and was killed by Dean. The strength that Dean showed was only at the level of an ordinary pioneer. For the bald, middle-aged man, he could kill him easily. Are you sure that Aisha is really there? Another old man wearing a black robe next to him said. He had an imposing appearance, extremely prominent cheekbones, and a pair of eagle eyes full of cold, killing intent. There was a monastery symbol on the chest of his robe. Hathaway nodded slightly. I can't be wrong. I can feel that she is there. It's definitely her. In that case, don't be careless. Aisha has been a saint for many years, and her strength is not small. It is said that the power of the bloodline has been awakened many times. I just don't know how many times it has awakened. The black-robe old man said, and looked at Hathaway. 3 times of awakening. Hathaway said, hiss. Everyone sucked in a breath of cold air, and their eyes were filled with shock. Then they turned serious. Don't worry, everyone. I've already said that my sister's demon hunting tool, blood vessel, is in my hands. She can't enter her demonic form, and she hasn't shown herself yet. She probably doesn't have the confidence to fight us head-on. Hathaway encouraged. Everyone looked at each other. Although they knew what Hathaway was thinking, they agreed with her words. Then let's kill this brat first. Then we'll go and open that damn shrine. That's right, let's get rid of one first. They quickly made a decision. The bald, middle-aged man waved his hand, and 4 people flew out from the back of the giant eagle and landed on the square. Each of them stared at Dean with an unfriendly face. The swords and knives that they carried on their bodies quickly softened and covered their bodies like a living mucus. One by one, they entered the demonic body state. They didn't have the slightest carelessness and didn't give Dean the slightest chance to escape. They were all pioneers, but 4 against 1 was more than enough to crush them. At this moment, an eagle cry sounded from the back of the mountain. The bald, middle-aged man looked up, and his face changed slightly. Is this the sound of the dragon, eagle? He suddenly thought of something, and his face changed. He glared at Dean and said, Did Hero and Ronan come here? Where are they? Dean ignored his angry shout, turned around, and rushed back into the temple. One escape. The 4 pioneers saw Dean's action, and they sneered and chased him one by one. Dozens of meters flew over quickly, and the 4 of them broke into the temple, hitting the door and making a rumbling sound. But the next moment, a scream came from inside the temple. Hathaway and the bald, middle-aged man, who were standing on the back of the giant eagle, heard the scream. Their eyelids twitched, and they felt something was wrong. Just at this moment, 3 black shadows flew out from the palace and fell on the square. At the same time, a clang of metal rang out, as if something had broken free from its shackles, and the screams became even more mournful as they rushed out from the palace. 2 ferocious, human-shaped monsters jumped out first. One of them was strangling a pioneer's neck. This pioneer looked like an insect. He was petite and less than 1.5 in height. However, his body was covered with tiny arthropods, each of which had a barb. At this moment, these arthropods were forcefully slapping the human-shaped monster who was strangling him. However, the human-shaped monster's arms were covered with extremely smooth scales and sharp claws. The claws pierced through the cuticle of the pioneer's neck, causing dark red blood to ooze out. Clang! The sound of chains came from the back of the 2 humanoid monsters. 2 black chains were connected to their backs, and when they rushed out of the temple, the chains were stretched taut. With a clang, a ferocious-looking chariot rushed out of the temple, and the metal wheels rolled over the threshold, rushing out of the temple as if it was flying. In the chariot, Dean pressed his palm on the metal platform, looking coldly at Hathaway and the others. When the chariot rushed out of the temple, Hathaway and the others were stunned. This scene was too shocking. The 2 humanoid monsters were clearly the pioneers who had revealed their appearances, but it was inconceivable that the 2 pioneers had become slaves to pull the chariot. Kill! Dean roared angrily, driving the chariot, and urged Hero and Ronan to kill. Hero and Ronan had already entered the demon state. They were like two ferocious beasts, and their bodies were completely demonized. Only their heads were still the same, but they were wearing black hoods, so their faces could not be seen clearly. It was extremely strange. Hearing Dean's roar, the two of them roared in grief and indignation, and they rushed out like crazy. The chains on their backs were pulled taut, and they drove the chariot forward at a high speed, pouncing on the three pioneers in front of them. The pioneer that Hero was strangling didn't have time to break free from Hero's claws, and his neck was pierced by Hero's sharp claws. He died on the spot. They are. The bald, middle-aged man stared blankly at the two humanoid monsters that were pulling the chariot. The ferocious demons reminded him of the two people, and he heard the dragon eagle's mournful cry. Could they be Hero and Ronan? He looked at the scene in disbelief. Whoosh! Hero and Ronan quickly caught up with the three pioneers. They were obviously much faster than the three pioneers, and they pulled the chariot forward. The three of them were so scared that they hurriedly retreated. They could tell that the two of them weren't existences that they could resist, so they turned around and fled to the giant eagle's feet. The distance between the hall and the giant eagle wasn't far, and the three of them quickly returned to the giant eagle's feet. At this time, the bald, middle-aged man reacted. He roared and jumped off the giant eagle and shouted at the two people that were rushing at him, "Stop! Hero, Ronan!" Hearing his roar, Hero and Ronan were stunned, and they immediately stopped. Their faces under the balaclavas were extremely ugly, and their eyes that were exposed from the eye sockets of the balaclavas flickered slightly. They didn't dare to look at the bald, middle-aged man. The others were stunned when they heard the bald, middle-aged man's roar. They looked at the two people who had stopped, and they were dumbfounded for a moment. They looked at the scene in disbelief. The two people who were pulling the chariot like slaves were actually the two war gods, Hero and Ronan. The black-robed old man was shocked, but he quickly thought of something, and his expression changed slightly. He said to Hathaway, "The magic scorpion war god alone can't deal with them. I'll go and help. Please help us look over there." Hathaway knew what he was referring to, and she also had the same idea. At the same time, she was more convinced of her feeling. She slightly narrowed her eyes as she looked at the temple in the distance. It turned out that the two war gods were working for her. No wonder they were hiding in the dark. "Why are you stopping? Kill!" Dean roared. Hero and Ronan were hesitant. They seemed to be advancing and retreating. The chains on their backs clanked. Dean was so angry that he slapped the weak current switch on the metal platform. Immediately, a burst of current passed through the chain and directly passed to Hero and Ronan's back. The current spread to their whole body, and the stinging pain made them scream in pain. Dean immediately stopped. He didn't want them to lose their combat effectiveness, as they were still fighting. "Kill!" He roared again. Hero and Ronan stopped trembling and hesitated as they heard Dean's words. The next moment, they roared and rushed out. "What did you do to them?" The bald, middle-aged man was furious as he saw the two rushing towards him again. Their eyes were full of despair and sadness. He knew that it was Dean's trick. He clenched his fists and roared into the sky. The sword on his back melted and covered his whole body. In the blink of an eye, he turned into a huge scorpion with a height of 3 meters. There was a sharp stinger on his tail. His hands turned into pincers, and a thick human-shaped arm grew out of his back. It was holding a sword. The shape of the sword was the same as the previous one. "Go to hell!" He roared, stamped his feet, jumped high, and rushed toward Dean. Dudian's eyes flashed as he saw that Hero and Ronan didn't stop the chariot. He tapped on a mechanism on the metal platform. A series of chain sounds echoed as several chains ejected from the bottom of the chariot. 4 iron pillars were erected on the 4 corners of the chariot. The ejected chains wrapped around the pillars and formed a cage around the chariot. "You want to stop me like this? Go to hell!" The scorpion god roared in anger as his pincers smashed the chains outside the chariot. The chains were pulled out of the drawer by the pressure. Dean dodged to the side to avoid the pincers. At the same time, 2 heart-wrenching cries sounded out. Hearing these cries, The demon scorpion army god could not help but look back, and he immediately saw the scene with bloodshot eyes. Hero and Ronan were dragged back by the chains, and a large amount of blood leaked out of their backs. They were in immense pain. He noticed that the chains he had pressed down on were related to the chains on their bodies. Pulling the chains around the chariot was equivalent to pulling the chains on their backs. Whoosh! He immediately retracted the pincers and stepped on the side of the chariot to pull away from the chariot. Hero and Ronan had retreated to the side of the chariot. They were rolling on the ground as they screamed in pain. It was as if their hearts were being pulled out of their lungs. Hathaway and the rest of the people on the Eagle saw that the two war gods were restrained by the chains. It was difficult to turn over and fight. Everyone felt a chill from the bottom of their hearts as they saw them rolling on the ground. It was hard to imagine what kind of life they had encountered here. Why didn't you continue? Dean coldly looked at the bald, middle-aged man. Scorpion army god? It seems that you have a good relationship with your two old friends. You love them so much. You. The scorpion god was so angry that his eyes turned red. But he didn't dare to attack as he saw the chains around Dean's chariot and Hero and Ronan, who were still screaming in pain on the ground. Dean looked at the two who were screaming on the ground. I told you not to play tricks. You have promised to fight for me, so you should keep your promise. Otherwise, you will suffer. You will die a horrible death. The scorpion god looked at Dean's arrogant face. The anger disappeared from his face as he looked at Dean. Dean looked at him and said to Hero and Ronan, "Get up and attack." You. Killing intent flashed in the scorpion god's eyes. He rushed out, but he didn't rush towards Dean. Instead, he rushed towards Hero and Ronan. All of this happened very quickly. In the blink of an eye, he appeared in front of the two of them. The arm on his back waved the saber and slashed down fiercely. With two clanging sounds, the ground cracked. His saber slashed at the chains on Hero and Ronan's backs, and sparks flew. However, the chains were like dead snakes. They shook a few times, but didn't break. Stupid. Dean looked at Hero and Ronan. Such a good opportunity. Why don't you make a move? Scorpion didn't expect that his hunting tool wouldn't be able to cut the chain. He roared in anger. I'll peel your skin. Whoosh, whoosh. Two sharp whistles suddenly rang out. The scorpion god's pupil shrank as he heard the sounds. He turned around and saw two shadows rushing towards him. It was Hero and Ronan. The scorpion god was aghast as he retreated in a hurry, but he couldn't dodge in time. Hero's thorns scratched his chest. At the same time, when Ronan's attack missed, he twisted his body, and his tail lashed out like a snake whip. The scorpion god helplessly looked at the scaly tail. He couldn't avoid it. Chapter 731. Two military gods, please stop. The black-robed old man held his sword horizontally in front of the demon scorpion war god to protect him. He quickly said to Hero and Ronan, who were preparing to attack, I know your difficulties. Please trust us. We will definitely save you. Hero and Ronan paused for a moment. They felt that Dean's hand was on a mechanism. They roared again and rushed towards the black-robed old man. Seeing this, the sword in the black-robed old man's hand quickly melted and covered his whole body. In an instant, he turned into a humanoid lizard-like monster. His whole body had many twisted limbs, and his neatly combed hair was wrapped in a dark cyan cuticle. He looked ferocious, somewhat similar to the shadow hunter that Dean had seen. A sharp sword protruded out of his palm as he blocked Hero's claws. Two military gods. So many of us have come together to quell the war in the outer wall. Don't fight for this kid. Don't let your reputation be tarnished. Sorrow appeared in Hero and Ronan's eyes. How could he know what they had been through? The word reputation had long been erased from their hearts. Compared to the hellish experience in the dungeon, honor and reputation were as insignificant as bubbles. Roar. Hero roared in anger and waved his claw again. The black-robed old man brandished the sharp sword in his hand. His body moved swiftly and nimbly as he dodged the two's attacks. It seemed like he was losing ground, but he did it with ease. While parrying, he continued to persuade. Two war gods, please stop. Once we kill this brat, we will immediately release you. Hero and Ronan didn't listen to him as they attacked like crazy. The outer edge of the wheels had diamond-shaped spikes which stirred the air. It made it impossible for people to get close to the chariot. If you want to kill me, then you will have to bury them with me. Dean saw that the old man didn't give up, so he ridiculed, "Don't talk flowery words. If they stop and let you attack me, then the chain will be destroyed and their spine will be pulled out. Not only will I die, but they will also die. What's the point of giving them a medal of glory?" The black-robed old man's face changed as he glared at Dean. "Brat, don't be too proud. Do you think that they can protect you? Then come and try." Dean deliberately provoked the black-robed old man. The black-robed old man was so angry that his face turned cold. At this time, Hero's sharp tail swung out and almost cut his neck while he was distracted. He was so scared that his face turned green and white. He jumped back and shouted, "Two military gods! Do you really want to sell your lives for this lowly person? Where's your backbone?" When Hero and Ronan heard him mention the word backbone, they immediately roared in grief and anger, and their attacks became fiercer. Scorpion, on the other side, saw that they were determined to protect Dean. There was a trace of decisiveness in his eyes as he looked at the people on the eagle. "All of you come and help. Kill this pariah. I will hold them back." The people on the giant eagle looked at each other and jumped down. They didn't dare to disobey the order of the magic scorpion god. Remember not to attack the chain. The magic scorpion god reminded the people behind him as he rushed toward Hero. The people knew this without him saying. After all, the chain was related to the lives of the two military gods. If they attacked the chain and caused the two military gods to lose their lives, it was hard to say whether the military would blame them or not. Fortunately, the chain was not dense. The gap in the middle was big enough to find an angle to attack Dean. Dean's face turned gloomy when he saw the 7 pioneers surrounding him. He activated his demonic body without saying a word. The giant sword on his back melted and covered his body. Sharp blade-like limbs grew all over his body. He looked like a monster made of countless blades. Only the part above his neck looked like a human. "Is that the Splitter's demonic body?" One of the pioneers couldn't help but exclaim when he saw Dean's demonic body. The black-robed old man and the magic scorpion god who were fighting with Hero and Ronan also looked over. Hathaway, who was on the giant eagle, also lowered her eyebrows. When she saw Dean's demonic body, a trace of surprise flashed through her eyes. Legendary magic marks were rare even among the pioneers. Most of the pioneers only had rare magic marks, but legendary magic marks were the keys to the inner wilderness. Only the Witcher clans had legendary magic marks in reserve. Dean looked at the 7 pioneers around him coldly. His super-wide field of vision allowed him to see the posture of each pioneer. It was like 7 humanoid monsters surrounded him from all directions. If ordinary people saw this scene, they would think that they had come to hell. "Kill!" One of the pioneers with a burly figure reacted first. His eyes were fierce as he roared and took the lead. His demonic body was a humanoid hedgehog-like monster. Countless small spikes protruded from his back. There were also 4 or 5 spikes as thick as ivory on his chest. Whether it was his back or chest, no one could attack him. His hand was covered with fur, and he slapped it like a lion's paw. Dean's eyes were cold. His sickle-like arm chopped down. Puff! The blade of his arm cut his wrist. Blood gushed out. His rough and hairy palm was immediately cut off without any obstruction. The burly man screamed and retracted his arm. He looked at Dean angrily. His magic marks weren't good at attacking in such a gap. They were biased towards defense. If he was in the chariot, he wouldn't be afraid of the other 6 pioneers attacking him. However, taking the initiative to attack was his weakness. He didn't expect that he would be so heavily injured. Seeing this, the others immediately retracted their claws and strange limbs. Although there were few pioneers who were Splitter, they had a deep impact on Splitter. Splitter was the most terrifying monster among the legendary monsters, especially in group battles. Their hearts skipped a beat as they looked at Dudien's demonic body. It was like using their own body to attack a monster with sharp blades. Use weapons. Another woman with a strange, colorful pattern on her face shouted. She quickly waved a black whip through the gap of the chain. Dean swung his 2 limbs to clamp the whip. With a stroke of his arm, the chain was broken. Get out of the way. Let me do it. Another pioneer roared and rushed to the side of the chariot. A strong wind was ejected from a protruding bone on his shoulder and shot into the chariot. Seeing the shape of his demonic body, Dean guessed that he was most likely good at using poison. He immediately held his breath. However, although he held his breath, he still felt dizzy because of the strong wind. The 7 pioneers in front of him instantly turned into 14, and then into 28. More and more pioneers seemed to be circling around him. He shook his head. At this time, a whistling sound came from the side. When he turned his head, he felt a pain in his waist. He was pierced by a sharp weapon. He immediately raised his hand and slapped it. With a crack, the sharp-blade palm cut off the weapon. He looked down and saw a broken spear in his waist. Go! Seeing that Dean was poisoned, the other pioneers immediately swarmed up. Dean's body shook slightly. He tried to open his eyes, and the double shadows in his eyes barely disappeared. He knew that he couldn't fight here for a long time. Although the chariot could protect him, it also hindered him. If they were in a square, he wouldn't be afraid to face these 7 pioneers. Although they had different tricks and magic marks, he had the ultimate attack magic marks, which was enough to kill them one by one when they formed a formation. Hero, Ronan. He waved his blade-like limbs to protect himself and shouted at the same time. Hero and Ronan, who were fighting fiercely, couldn't help but look back. They saw Dean raise an arm. They had seen this gesture before. It was the retreat gesture they had planned. The 2 noticed the broken spear in Dean's waist and saw the 7 pioneers swarming up around the chariot. They immediately knew that Dean couldn't fight alone. Chapter 732. Stop him. The demon scorpion warlord who was fighting with Hero immediately shouted at the 7 people surrounding the chariot. The 7 of them were shocked. Only then did they notice that the fierce battle between him and Hero had stopped without any hesitation. This could only mean that their previous fierce battle was just for show, and they did not really use their full strength. Moreover, the injuries on their bodies were only minor. Although it seemed fierce, there were no fatal injuries. Stop him. The 7 people immediately reacted and surrounded Dean. Dean's eyes narrowed when he heard Hero's roar. The next moment, his face was full of anger. He raised his hand and hit the mechanism. Traitor, go to hell. The mechanism fell. Hero's body twitched and fell to the ground. His body was stiff and trembling like a dead fish. Ronan on the other chain wasn't electrocuted. There were several mechanisms to control the chain. Some were integrated mechanisms, and some were separate mechanisms. Dean only hit the mechanism to punish Hero. Ronan was stunned when he saw that he wasn't electrocuted. He was secretly relieved. At this time, he saw the demon scorpion warlord wanted to support Hero, so he hurriedly said, "Don't touch him." The demon scorpion warlord immediately stopped and looked at him in surprise. At the same time, Dean jumped out of the chariot like a nimble fish. He abandoned the chariot and flew towards the temple. Hathaway, who was standing on the giant eagle, frowned when she saw this scene. She wanted to stop her, but she had scruples about the pitch-black temple. She was worried that Aisha would take the opportunity to launch a sneak attack. At this time, the 7 pioneers tried their best to catch up with Dean. They roared angrily, but their speed was much lower than Dean's. Only 2 of them could barely keep up with Dean's speed. However, they were late and lagged behind. It was difficult for them to catch up. You're courting death. Dean, who was flying at a high speed, suddenly stopped. It caught them off guard. At the same time, his strange blade-like limbs spread out like a peacock's tail. The sharp blades on his limbs reflected the cold, murderous aura. He suddenly strangled the 2 people who were chasing him. The pupils of the 2 shrank, and they were scared out of their wits. They didn't expect that Dean would dare to turn back and kill them when he was desperately escaping. They had no time to defend themselves and could only wave their weapons to block. Chi! Chi! Their weapons were instantly cut off, and even their bodies were cut into several pieces. One of them died on the spot, while the other reacted quickly and avoided the fatal parts. Although he was cut in half, he didn't die after his upper body fell to the ground. At the same time, he quickly crawled back with his hands. He didn't even care about the internal organs and blood flowing out of his abdomen, and let his intestines and stomach drag on the ground. This scene was extremely bloody, and it sent chills down everyone's spine. The speed of the 5 people chasing after him immediately decreased. Dudian didn't look back as he turned and rushed towards the temple. In the blink of an eye, the distance between the two sides was pulled apart. The 5 people saw that they couldn't catch up. They slowly stopped in front of the temple. They didn't dare to approach easily. After all, Haley had said that the former dragon Saint Aisha was in the temple. If she made a move, then the 5 of them would be killed instantly. Scorpion God and the black-robed old man sighed as they saw that they missed the opportunity. Your Highness Hathaway, we can't let them run away. Let's go in together. Scorpion God knew that the time couldn't be delayed. He looked up and said to Hathaway. He was ready to attack. Since Aisha didn't have a magic hunting tool, then he believed that they were enough to trap her. All right, Hathaway nodded. She understood that they couldn't wait for a long time. If she let her sister run away, then it would be difficult to catch her again. She wouldn't feel at ease if she couldn't get rid of her in time. She knew better than anyone else how terrifying her sister's talent was. If she was given time to grow, then she wouldn't be able to guarantee that she wouldn't face a crisis in the future. Ronan looked at Dudian, who was standing in front of the gate of the temple. The latter's cold expression struck his brain like lightning. Ronan's expression reminded him of the time before he and Hero were captured. Although he fainted at that time and didn't have time to react or see the situation clearly, but he knew that he was injured when he and Hero rushed out of the temple. Afterwards, he was puzzled in the dungeon until he was chained to the chariot by Dudian. He was stimulated by the chains. Only then did he realize that the mysterious attack was exactly the same. Don't go! He looked at the Scorpion God, who was moving forward. He cried out, There's a trap inside. Don't go in. Scorpion God and the black-robed old man were startled as they stared at him. Trap? Are you sure? The black-robed old man was the first to ask. Ronan's face was pale. I'm sure. Hero and I were injured like that. Don't go in there. Scorpion God frowned, but Hero said that there's a passage inside. He is going to escape from there. That's a lie. Ronan was fully awake. He understood Dudian's plan. He deliberately told them that there was a secret passage inside. If they betrayed him, then they would say it and lure the others to take advantage of the situation to catch them in one fell swoop. His heart trembled slightly as he felt fear. In his eyes, the youth in front of him was a devil in human skin, dirty and evil. He immediately said to the demon scorpion war god and the rest, It's a trap inside. You must not go in, or else. Speaking up to hear, his heart surged with sorrow. The miserable experience in the dungeon was unbearable for him to recall. Haley frowned as she looked at Ronan. She turned to look at the temple. She saw that Dudian was still standing in front of the door. He didn't go into the temple to escape. If it was an ordinary person, it would undoubtedly confirm Ronan's words. There was a trap inside, and Dudian was waiting for them to go in. However, she had been with Dudian before, so she had a good understanding of this youth. He was a very cunning person. If what Ronan said was true, then what he did was obviously a failure. Thinking of this, she was bewildered. Suddenly, she caught a glimpse of Hero, who was twitching on the ground. Her pupils shrank, and she turned to look at Ronan. Her eyes emitted a cold, murderous aura. He is injured. How come you are fine? As soon as she said that, the hesitating magic scorpion god, the black-robed old man, and the other 5 pioneers were stunned. They immediately reacted and looked at Ronan with doubt in their eyes. They were all chained up, and Hero was already convulsing and unconscious. He was even drooling, and he definitely wasn't faking it. However, Ronan was fine, and he was still able to talk to them and tell them this information. Could it be that he was completely loyal to Dudian, and he deliberately stayed here to delay them? Ronan was also stunned when he heard Haley's words. The next moment, it was as if cold water was poured on his head. His body trembled slightly, and he looked up at the magic scorpion god, Haley, and the others. Everyone's eyes were filled with doubt and doubt. He opened his mouth slightly, but he felt that his mouth was dry and bitter. He suddenly understood why Dudian didn't attack him, but only Hero. He thought that Dudian didn't realize that he also had the intention to rebel, so he only punished Hero. However, he now knew that he was too naive. This little devil's mercy was no different from pushing him into the abyss. All the truth that he said became empty. If deliberately telling them that there was a secret escape route in the temple was the first step to prevent them from rebelling, then only punishing Hero was the second step to prevent them from rebelling. These two preparations made him and Hero unable to resist. Even their resistance would be used by Dudian, and they would become Dudian's accomplices. He suddenly wanted to cry, and he had never felt so powerless before. I really didn't lie to you. His voice was bitter, and he felt like he was struggling on his deathbed. After understanding Dudian's plan, he naturally knew what kind of image he had in the hearts of Haley and the others. At the same time, he also thought of another point that he was at a loss. Why didn't Dean directly attack him and make him faint? That way, he wouldn't betray them, and he would lose the risk of arguing with them. Regarding this point, the only answer he could think of was that Dudian probably calculated that if they fainted at the same time, their one-sided words alone might not be able to completely convince Haley and the others. After all, a person who could betray them at any time shouldn't get such important information. Once they were suspicious, it would be very difficult to trick them into entering the temple. Looking at Ronan's pale explanation, Haley frowned even tighter. The other 5 pioneers were also skeptical. Some of them had already put away their weapons, and they helped the pioneer who was cut at the waist to put his organs into his abdomen. On the other hand, Hathaway, the demon scorpion war god, and the black-robed elder had all entered their demon forms. They only had light burns on their bodies, especially Hathaway, who had entered the demon dragon's demon form. Her body still maintained a half-human appearance. The black dragon wings on her back were huge, blocking the sunlight and wrapping around her body. Other than the light burns on the surface of her wings, her clothes were undamaged. "Follow me." Hathaway's eyes were cold. She stared at the temple and squeezed 3 words from her teeth. Scorpion War God and the black-robed old man were also angry. Most of the ordinary pioneers were from the military and the monastery. At this moment, almost all of them were seriously injured. Some of them even died on the spot. This made them angry and annoyed. But what made their teeth itch was that Dean's inexplicable posture of pointing at the sky had fooled all of them. If they weren't distracted by looking at the sky, they wouldn't be so slow to react and get injured when the explosion sounded. "Kill!" The magic scorpion god roared and rushed together with Hathaway. In addition to anger, they also knew that they were in a dilemma at the moment. If they didn't take advantage of the situation to pursue, they could only choose to retreat. They came here with a total of 12 people, but now more than half of them were lost. The other pioneers were either dead or injured. Only the 3 of them could maintain their peak state. Even if Haisha was in the temple, they could only fight. In fact, they originally planned to rely on the 3 of them to deal with Aisha. The rest of the ordinary pioneers couldn't intervene in such a battle. Blind intervention would only add to the chaos. The black-robed old man followed closely behind Hathaway and the demon scorpion military god. His eyes were cold like a lizard's. Ronan's words from before had more or less left a mark in his heart. Although he was furious, he was still cautious. He lagged behind a little and let Hathaway and the demon scorpion military god test the waters first. In the blink of an eye, the 3 of them rushed into the temple. As soon as they entered the temple, Hathaway stopped. Her pupils shrank as she stared at a slender and quiet figure sitting on the top of the temple. The latter was wearing a thin veil, but the outline of her cheeks was clearly visible. It was her sister, Aisha. The magic scorpion god also saw Aisha. His face changed and his eyes became dignified. The black-robed old man entered the hall and quickly glanced around. He saw that there was no strange reaction. He slowly stopped and walked behind Haley and the magic scorpion army god. He also saw Aisha in the hall. He frowned and was secretly on guard. "You are really here." Hathaway stared at Aisha and slightly sneered. The pure and clean saintess actually mingles with a man. It's simply filthy. Shut up, bitch. Dean, who was standing next to Aisha, was infuriated when he heard her words. This time he was really angry. He could tolerate being insulted with a smile, but he couldn't accept others saying bad things about Aisha. That was a forbidden place in his heart that couldn't be violated. You pretended to be your sister to seduce me. You flirtatious and seduce men at such a young age. A bitch like you doesn't deserve to mention your sister. Hathaway's expression changed slightly. After all, she was still a young girl who had yet to reach the age of 18. Although she had always been shrewd, this was the first time someone had insulted her in such a manner. Her face quickly darkened as she said, "Lowly commoner, you're already at the end of your rope. Hurry up and beg my sister to protect you." Hee, if she can really protect you. Oh, that's right. She was injured by the undead king in order to protect a lowly commoner like you. Lowly commoner, you really are a jinx. Her face was full of mockery, and her words were sharp. Each word was like a knife stabbing into Dean's heart. Dean knew that he had to calm down, but when he heard her words, he still felt his eyes turn red. The blood in his body was about to explode. His body trembled slightly, and he clenched his fists tightly. The killing intent and anger in his heart, as well as a deeper layer of sadness, were completely present on his face. Hathaway's words were sarcastic, but it was the truth. Because of this, he was so angry that he almost lost his mind. Chapter 734. Your Highness Hathaway, your sister's state doesn't seem to be right, the black-robed old man suddenly said. He stared at Aisha, who was wearing a veil. Look at her pupils. They seem to be completely black. Has she... Hathaway and the demon scorpion army god were shocked when they heard his words. They found out that Aisha's eyes were dark like a deep pool. There seemed to be no white in her eyes. Hathaway's face changed as she looked at Dean. What's going on? What's going on? Dean heard her words and laughed, but his expression became distorted and ferocious. You asked me what's going on? Have you forgotten what you have done? If it wasn't for you, if it wasn't for you. At this point, he fiercely gritted his teeth and stared at her as if he wanted to kill her. Hathaway was startled for a moment, and the last scene she saw when she flew away suddenly appeared in her mind. She suddenly understood everything. No wonder she felt so strange when she saw her sister again. She couldn't help but laugh. So that's how it is. I didn't expect her to be as strong as I imagined, and she was still no match for that corpse king. I said, with her personality, even if she hates me, she will at least return to the dragon clan. Grandmother Dragon Mother loves her very much. If she goes back, she will definitely make the decision for her. So it's not that she won't go back, it's that she can't go back. The more she talked, the brighter her smile became. She seemed to be more relaxed. She already had the confidence to fight against Aisha without the blood vessel in her hand. Now that Aisha was infected by the Corpse King and lost consciousness, she was even less afraid. Even without the help of the magic scorpion war god and the old man in black robe, she still had the victory in her grasp. Dean looked at her smile, and the madness in his eyes slowly cooled down. He looked at her quietly and straight. Any words were superfluous at this moment. He did not say a word. All the anger and uncontrollable emotions were gone. He slowly raised his palm and patted on a wooden post next to him. As soon as the wooden pillar fell, there seemed to be the sound of a mechanism twisting and turning in the hall. The magic scorpion god and the black-robed old man were shocked as they heard the sound. The previous battle had made them understand the sinister and cunning side of the boy. They didn't dare to take it lightly, even though the odds of winning were greater at the moment. Very quickly, the two of them noticed that water was silently flowing out from all over the hall. quietly flowing and covering the ground beneath their feet. Water? The three of them were surprised as they saw the water spread to their feet. They didn't know whether it was clean water or some unknown venom. The magic scorpion god and the black-robed old man jumped like a bird and landed on the platform under the two pillars. The height of the platform was exactly the same as the height of Dean, so it wouldn't be submerged by the water. Haley looked at the water flowing closer and closer. She was about to jump to avoid it, but she suddenly thought of the previous battle. Dean had deliberately pointed to the sky to attract their attention, but they were injured by the explosion under their feet. Thinking of this, she originally wanted to jump to avoid the water. She thought that with Dean's cunning character, if the water was a venom trap, then it would be too rash. Even a small hunter would notice the spreading water and have enough time to avoid it. Such a trap had no offensive effect, but it could force others to move to other places. She glanced at the hall and found that in addition to the hall they were standing on, there were 4 platforms under the pillars where the scorpion god and the black-robed old man were standing. If one thought that the water was venom, then most people would jump to these 4 platforms to escape. However, the strangest thing was why there was a platform under the pillars. Haley's pupils shrank as she shouted to the magic scorpion god and the black-robed old man, "Get out of there! It's the real trap." The magic scorpion god and the black-robed old man were startled, but reacted instantly. Dean's palm had touched the lion's head and pressed it down. How fast was the electric current? Even the pioneers couldn't reach 1% of it. The demon scorpion war god and the black-robed old man had yet to lift their feet when their bodies suddenly trembled. They were stuck to the high platform by the electric current, twitching and trembling. It was as if they were performing a strange dance on the spot. Their eyes were blank, and as the trembling became more and more intense, even saliva was spilling out of their mouths. Seeing their strange appearance, Hathaway immediately thought of Hero, who was chained to the chariot outside. He was also in the same situation, his whole body inexplicably twitching. A chill rose in her heart. This attack was too strange. She couldn't understand how Dean attacked. Was it venom? However, the demon scorpion war god and the black-robed elder did not touch anything at all. Even if the platform was covered in poison, they were still wearing battle boots, and they did not touch their bodies. Could it be that this mysterious poison could poison people through their clothes? She couldn't imagine what kind of poison this was. Out of all the poisons she knew, none had such a terrifying effect. Moreover, in her heart, she believed that this was not a poison, but a mysterious special method that she had never seen before. She didn't go forward to help them. Ronan had stopped the magic scorpion god from saving Hero. It showed that this strange attack was contagious. "You are smart." Dean looked at Hathaway, who was standing in the same place. His indifferent eyes revealed dense killing intent and a touch of ferocious color. "But you still have to die." Hathaway had wanted to jump onto the roof of the hall to avoid the water spreading toward her feet, but when she heard the first part of the sentence, she gave up on the idea. When she heard the second part of the sentence, she realized that something was wrong. When she wanted to fly up again, she found that her body was frozen, and her mind instantly went blank. Dean took a small bow from the wall and took out a small arrow from the drawer of the cabinet. It was about 10 centimeters long. It was as thin as a quill. He looked at Hathaway, who was trembling from the electric current in the water. He unceremoniously aimed at her throat and shot the arrow. The arrow was as thin as a pencil in an instant. With a poochy sound, the small arrow hit Hathaway's throat, but did not penetrate through. It only embedded 2 or 3 centimeters in and was blocked by the demonic dragon scale on her neck. Dean knocked the arrow again and aimed at her eye. Die. Chapter 735. Dean quickly grabbed another small arrow and was about to shoot it into her other eye socket. Suddenly, Haley looked up to the sky and screamed. The wings of the demonic dragon flapped and hugged her body. Her body left the ground and flew towards the dome of the hall. Dean's face changed. The small arrow in his hand quickly shot out and nailed on one of her wings. However, at this moment, Hathaway had already gotten rid of the paralysis caused by the electric current. Her wings turned into a black hurricane and swept toward the dome at an extremely fast speed. With a bang, she crashed into the mud bricks of the dome, creating a huge hole, and flew straight into the distant sky. Dean didn't expect her to break free from the electric shock. He was surprised and angry. He flapped his wings and quickly chased after her. Hathaway's face was full of panic and anger. Her beautiful, smiling face was now incomparably hideous. Her tail curled around the small arrow on her wing and fiercely swung it towards Dean. Dean hurriedly dodged. The arrow almost touched his cheek. He was almost stabbed. "I will kill you." Hathaway's sharp voice spread through the sky. She was full of killing intent and endless anger. She didn't look back as she flew towards the sighing wall. Dean rushed out of the roof of the hall. He saw that Hathaway was already thousands of meters away. It was almost impossible to catch up with her. He was so angry that his heart was about to explode. The enemy he had already captured had actually escaped. If it was the demon scorpion war god and the others who had escaped, he would not be so angry. However, the person who had escaped was the person he wanted to kill the most. The person he hated the most. Oh! He roared to the sky to vent the anger in his heart. At this time, Hathaway's back had completely disappeared from his eyes. She was submerged in the white clouds in the sky. Dean's eyes were like those of a ghost in the abyss. After a long time, he slowly retracted his eyes. The killing intent in his eyes gradually faded, and he restored his calmness. At this time, he thought of the magic scorpion army and the black-robed old man who were still in the hall. He immediately turned around and drilled into the hall through the hole in the dome. He saw that the two had fallen to the ground and had fainted. The power has been strengthened. How could it fail to trap 3 people at once? Dean clenched his fists. It was such a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, but he let Hathaway run away. It was really a great hatred in his heart. He raised his hand and turned off the mechanism. Then, he went forward and crippled the tendons of the hands and feet of the demon scorpion army god and the black-robed old man. Then, he stabbed daggers and steel needles at the weak points of their joints to restrict their movements. After doing all this, he looked up at the hole in the dome and cursed in his heart. The walls of this temple were all made of metal, but the dome was not made of metal. Instead, it was made of concrete. If it was made of metal, it would inevitably attract lightning when it rained. Although there was a lightning rod, a metal building would make the lightning rod useless. It was because of this safety consideration that they did not choose to use a full metal roof, which allowed Hathaway to escape successfully. If she turned around and rushed out of the hall, she would be hit by the electricity on the door again, and her chances of escaping would be much smaller. Perhaps this was fate? He was angry in his heart. Hathaway didn't know about the conductive material, but she chose to escape through the dome. He didn't know whether it was because of her good luck or because she was eager to escape that she chose the fastest route to escape. "I'm sorry. I couldn't keep her." Dean looked at Aisha. His eyes were full of guilt and sadness. He reached out to cover her cold hands and put them on his forehead. He couldn't help but want to cry. Aisha was silent and didn't respond. Dean put her cold hand on his forehead. He was full of remorse and guilt. After a long time, he raised his head and said, "But she was hit by my arrow. There is mercury and poison in the arrow. She shouldn't be able to live." Aisha was still silent. Dean stared at her. "Sooner or later, I will kill my way to the Dragon Clan, even if she is lucky enough to survive. I will make her corpse kneel in front of you and repent to you." Aisha's face didn't have the slightest emotion, as if she didn't hear it. Dean looked at her for a moment and slowly turned his head. His eyes fell on several figures outside the hall. His eyes flashed, and he immediately rushed out. On the broken square outside, the dust from the explosion hadn't subsided yet. There was still dust in the air. Several pioneers were lying on the ground. Some seemed to have fainted. Some were crawling together in pairs, bandaging their wounds, applying medicinal powder, and trying to save themselves. Dean's sudden appearance startled several conscious pioneers. They looked at him in astonishment. They didn't expect that he could come out of the temple alive. Very soon, The pioneers noticed that there was no sound of the battle between the demon-scorpion war god and the black-robed old man. Moreover, Hathaway had flown away in the sky earlier. An ominous premonition immediately filled the hearts of the pioneers. Sins are irredeemable, Dudian whispered in a low voice and flew away. Kill. One of the pioneers with a broken arm saw Dean pouncing on him. Although he was frightened, he was not weak at all. He roared and pounced on Dean. However, the next moment, he was surrounded by the sharp blade-like limbs on Dean's back. The limbs flashed and cut huge wounds on his body. Dean didn't kill him. He just knocked him unconscious and then rushed toward another person. Even if they were in their peak state, it was very difficult for them to fight against Dean. Moreover, they were seriously injured at the moment, so they were quickly defeated by Dean. When the battle was over, Dean waved his hand. Noyce, who was standing on the edge of the square, immediately rushed over. Master, are you okay? Dean shook his head and pointed at the pioneers on the ground. Put them in the dungeon and deal with them the same way as Hero, Ronan, and the two in the temple. Noyce was relieved to see Dean safe and sound. He immediately turned and ran to call the guards. Half an hour later, the square completely calmed down. Only the deep pit of the explosion told about the terrible battle that took place here. Dean wearily sat back on the throne of the temple. He was still worried about Hathaway's escape. He closed his eyes, and after a long time, he exhaled and gradually calmed down the depression in his heart. It was meaningless to continue to be angry. It would only delay his time and energy. He waited for Noyce to return and immediately asked him to call the wall builders to repair the square. At the same time, he called the attendants to clean up the water stains in the hall. How was the construction of our second base? Dean asked Noyce. He asked Noyce to hand over this matter to Hawkeye. He didn't know the progress. Chapter 736. That's good. Dean was a little relieved. Prepare a batch of wall builders to transform Utopia Mountain. Also stop the transportation of flames to the Wall of Sighs. Send them here and be ready for war. If you want to bury the gunpowder, the previous tunnel is already there. We can bury the gunpowder at any time, Noyce said. Dean shook his head. The previous amount of gunpowder was too little. This time we have to bury the entire mountain with gunpowder. This time they suffered a big loss. The next time they come, they will be more prepared. Maybe there will be stronger people coming, so we will have to use more gunpowder. Bury the entire mountain with gunpowder? Noyce couldn't help but ask. If that's the case, won't everyone on the mountain be able to survive the explosion? Dudian nodded. So let Barton and Sergei go to the second base to deal with the affairs there. I'll take care of things here. But in that case, you will also be injured. I have my own ways to protect myself. Go ahead and do it. Dean's eyes were calm as he said, in addition, send more people to patrol the mountain. Be on high alert. Don't relax even for a moment. Noyce was startled. He was about to open his mouth, but he was shocked. Since he was going to bury the gunpowder, why would he send people to patrol the mountain? Obviously, it was unnecessary. He was well aware of Dean's ruthless means. He was afraid that the patrols were just a cover. If the enemy really attacked, then most of them would be killed along with the mountain. No one would be spared. He felt a chill in his heart. This was a cruel and ruthless method of killing 1,000 enemies and sacrificing 800 of oneself. But he couldn't say anything to stop it, because today's battle also showed him how difficult Dean's situation was. A little mistake, and he would be killed at this moment. Sergei and his accomplices wouldn't have a good end if Dudian was killed. I know. I'll send people to do it. Noyce lowered his head. Dean nodded. Go. Dean waved his hand to let Noyce retreat. He sat on the cold throne and quietly looked at the blue sky outside. The next days would be really dangerous. He didn't know whether the poison and mercury would be able to kill Hathaway or not. But in any case, he had to be prepared. It didn't matter if Hathaway died or not. The news of the battle would spread to all the major forces of the inner wall and attract their attention. At that time, I really should have smeared corpse poison on the arrow. He thought to himself with a trace of regret. Many of the enemies who died in his hands died because of carelessness. He didn't expect that he would make such a mistake. Hathaway was actually able to break free from the restraint of the electric current. This was something he didn't expect. Originally, he wanted to capture her alive and torture her to vent the monstrous hatred in his heart. In the end, it became a loophole that let the enemy escape. He succeeded because of hatred, and he also failed because of hatred. It was really hateful. Whoosh! Hathaway flew along the sky in the direction of the sighing wall after escaping from mountain. Her body was like a huge blackbird. When she saw that Dean did not chase after her, she was relieved. Her body also slowed down slowly. She swayed in the air, and bursts of dizziness and nausea came, making her extremely uncomfortable. She flew over the sighing wall, but she didn't fly directly to the inner wall area. Instead, she flew outside the giant wall. She slowly slowed down after crossing the giant wall. Her body gradually landed in the messy grass outside the giant wall. There were piles of rotten monster bones around her. She looked back and saw that no one was following her. She immediately folded her wings and drilled into the woods. There were snakes and monsters lurking in the woods. They attacked Hathaway as she passed by. Hathaway didn't look at them as she raised her hand. Her nails were like knives as she cut off the snake's head. She went straight into the depths of the woods. She found a big tree and couldn't stand it anymore. She sat down on the roots of the tree and gasped for breath. Her small face had an unhealthy red color, as if her face was congested. She untied her demonic body and took out some bottles and jars from the bag on her back. Her snow-white, jade-like fingers slightly trembled as she opened the bottles and took out a few green pills from one of the bottles and swallowed them. Then, she took out another bottle and poured out a dark red powder from it, smearing it on her wounds. She swallowed her saliva and mustered up her courage to reach out to grab the arrow in her eye socket. As soon as her fingers touched the arrow trembled and she immediately felt a tearing pain. She clenched her teeth and suddenly grabbed the arrow with her palm, pulling it out. Blood gushed out from her eye socket and sprinkled on the exquisite soft armor on her chest. It was a ghastly sight. She didn't need to look in the mirror to know that her appearance at the moment must be extremely ugly. However, this wasn't what she was most concerned about. She didn't know if the arrow was smeared with corpse poison or not. If Dean had smeared her sister's corpse poison on the arrow, then she wouldn't be able to escape. Even if she cut out all the tissues in her eye socket, she wouldn't be able to reverse the fate of being infected. This was the reason why she didn't choose to directly return to the inner wall. If she was infected and turned into an undead, then she would die if she went back to the inner wall. Even if the dragon personally obliterated her and no one would save her, it was better to stay in the world outside the giant wall and continue to live as an undead. After all, even the Monster Research Institute couldn't tell if the infected undead had consciousness or not. This was an eternal puzzle. Humans didn't know if there were ghosts in the world. They didn't know if their consciousness would continue to drift between heaven and earth after death. The only way to get the answer was to die, but there was no way to tell the answer to the living after death. The same was true for the undead. After being infected by the virus, whether there was still consciousness in the brain and everything around it from the perspective of a bystander, this answer, only the undead knew. She didn't want to die. Even if she became an undead, she wanted to live. Who? She leaned against the tree and gasped for breath. She was waiting. Although the discomfort and dizziness from her body let her know that the arrow was not smeared with corpse poison, but it definitely contained poison. If the treatment was delayed, it was likely that it wouldn't be cured. If he wants to smear corpse poison, then it must be taken from her mouth. She is already a king of corpses. If I am infected by her venom, then I should become an undead or another king of corpses in about half an hour. Her face was ugly. She clenched her teeth and felt her body was cold. This was not the cold in her heart, but the real cold. It was as if she was surrounded by ice. She took out her dagger and tore off a piece of her soft armor. She twisted it into a twist and bit it in her mouth. Then she disinfected the dagger and raised her neck to cut out the small hole in her neck that was pierced by the arrow. Blood flowed from her throat. She slightly gasped. This was the first time she had encountered such severe pain in her life. Her heart was full of resentment. She didn't expect that Aisha hadn't made a move yet. Dean alone made her so embarrassed. She had an 80% chance of winning this trip. She didn't expect that before she met Aisha, the whole army was routed and only she escaped. No one would believe such a battle record. Who would believe that a pariah with no background in the outer wall not only became a pioneer, but also almost wiped out the 12 of them with his own strength? In addition to her, the magic scorpion army and the black-robed old man were big shots in the inner wall. The rest of the pioneers were also very famous. Such a force was enough to run amok in the barren area. But they had fallen in the outer wall. If I don't die, I will definitely kill you. She gritted her teeth in hatred. This kind of hatred was even more than her hatred for her sister, because her sister had never hurt her. She had never been injured except for her own exercise since she was a child. Half an hour passed quickly. Hathaway had been silently counting the time. When half an hour was getting closer and closer, her heart was filled with surprise. Until the time passed, she repeatedly checked her body several times. She still didn't find any signs of zombification. Then she smiled again. Although she was seriously injured and blind in one eye, but compared with the worst situation of being infected by the ptomaine, she was extremely lucky. Bastard, you didn't smear the ptomaine on the arrow. Today you let me live. The next time we meet, it will be your death. The smile on Hathaway's face disappeared. A trace of killing intent flashed through her eyes. She no longer waited and entered the demonic body. She spread her wings and instantly cut off the tree behind her. She flew up into the sky like a rock. They want to catch me alive, but I ran away. My life isn't meant to die. Hathaway flew in the sky. She had guessed the reason why Dean didn't smear the ptomaine on the arrow. The scorpion and the black-robed old man twitched and couldn't move. She could see that the strange attack would attract her so that Dean would have enough opportunities to kill her. Because of this, Dean hated her so much that he didn't want to kill her directly. That would be too easy for her, and the result was that it became her only hope to survive. Life is impermanent and unpredictable. I really can't have too many distractions when killing the enemy. Hathaway's mind had grown after struggling to come back from the edge of life and death. She secretly warned herself that if she met Dean again in the future, she couldn't make such a big mistake. Even if she was 100% sure, she had to kill him directly. She flew straight to the giant wall and was ready to rush back to the Dragon Clan to heal and detoxify. Right at this moment, she suddenly glanced out of the corner of her eyes, and her expression instantly changed. She forcefully stopped and lowered her head to look at a faraway ditch. There was an enormous pitch-black figure squirming there. Although she was thousands of meters high in the sky, but she could see it clearly. She instantly recognized that it was similar to the black prison produced by the Monster Research Institute. The black prison of the Monster Research Institute. How did it come here? And it's so huge. Hathaway was surprised. She was now a saint of the Dragon Clan, so she naturally knew a lot of secrets. The black prison developed by the Monster Research Institute in recent years was a strange monster weapon. Even the elders of the monastery had condemned the experiment of the Monster Research Institute. They thought that the black prison was an artificial creature. The creation of life had always been the right of the God of Light. The experiment of the Monster Research Institute obviously violated the divine right. However, as far as she knew, the black prison in the Demonic Creature Research Institute was very small. She had even personally gone to take a look. However, this one had a diameter of more than 10 meters. It was practically a moving hill. Her eyes flickered. She suddenly felt that this Demonic Creature Research Institute wasn't as simple as she thought. She looked around and didn't see anyone else, nor did she see anyone from the Demonic Creature Research Institute. Could it be that Black Hell came here by himself? She pondered for a moment and wanted to go down to see what was going on. However, she suddenly felt dizzy and her vision turned black. At the same time, her whole body felt numb and stiff. She was shocked and didn't dare to stay any longer. She turned around and rushed into the giant wall at full speed towards the direction of the Dragon Clan. Hathaway couldn't hold on anymore as she flew back to the Dragon Clan's territory. She glided down vertically and fell on the square of a mountain. The news of the saint's injury spread throughout the Dragon Clan. All the elders were alarmed. The patriarch was the first one to arrive. He brought the best doctor to check and treat Hathaway's injury. A few days later, Hathaway gradually woke up. Under the questioning of the patriarch and the elders, she told them the whole story of her injury. She knew that she could not hide it. There were too many people involved in this matter. The magic scorpion, military god of the military, and the black-robed old man of the monastery were both famous figures. If she disappeared without a trace, it would definitely cause them to investigate closely. However, at the same time, she concealed her true purpose. She only said that she chased a zombie pioneer to the Outer Wall area. Then she realized that the situation in the Outer Wall area was not right. So she investigated all the way to Wu Tuan Mountain. Then, it led to the great battle that followed. In addition, she also said that she saw Sister Aisha, but she had turned into a zombie king. In fact, the news that Aisha was still alive had already spread to the Dragon Clan, but no one had seen it with their own eyes. At this moment, Hathaway's words immediately caused an uproar. All the elders and patriarch were shocked. They couldn't believe that Aisha, who had been in the wasteland for more than 10 years and had killed countless monsters and undead, was actually infected and turned into an undead. This was simply unimaginable. Some elders didn't believe it, but they didn't say it on spot. The patriarch was also skeptical. He knew the relationship between the two sisters, but he felt that Hathaway shouldn't lie about such a thing. In any case, the Dragon Clan would absolutely send someone to check again. However, the information provided by Hathaway made them evaluate the strength of the people they would send. The demon scorpion war god and the black-robed old man of the monastery were very strong. It could even be said that if Hathaway didn't have the power of bloodline, then it would be difficult to win against them. Not to mention there were 9 other pioneers. Such a lineup to kill the enemy in the outer wall was simply using a butcher's knife to kill a chicken. But the result was that the butcher's knife was broken. They had to weigh the degree of danger in the outer wall. After Hathaway told the news, she asked about her own situation. The answer she got immediately made people feel cold and even desperate. Although the poison in your body has been removed, you came back too late. Even though I called for people to treat you as soon as possible, it was too late. Besides the poison, mercury had also seeped into your body. The doctors could only cut off the inner walls of your organs and wash your blood at the same time to save your life. But this way, the power of your awakened bloodline has been completely eliminated, and your strength has also been weakened. But at least your life has been saved. Hathaway's father, the patriarch of the Dragon Clan, comforted her. Hearing this, Hathaway was completely stunned. Her bloodline power was eliminated. She had awakened her bloodline power for the second time. Was she now an ordinary pioneer who hadn't awakened her bloodline power? She lay on the bed in a daze. Her mind was completely unable to hold anything else. This blow was 100 times more difficult for her to accept than losing an eye. Your eye has temporarily stabilized, but the damage to the tissues in your eye is too severe to repair. After you recover, I'll take you to the Monster Research Institute and have them implant another eye in you. Your vision won't be inferior to your own eye. The patriarch continued to comfort him. Hathaway was stunned for a long time. She slowly turned her head and looked at the patriarch of the Dragon Clan. Her face suddenly showed a sad smile. "Father, you never know what your child needs." The patriarch was stunned and silent for a while. "I'd rather die than accept this kind of treatment. Who did this? I'm going to kill him." Hathaway's eyes suddenly revealed a crazy, killing intent. She bit her lips so hard that blood overflowed from the corner of her mouth and slid down the side of her face to the bed sheets. Chapter 737. Hathaway slowly calmed down after hearing the old man's words. After a moment, she suddenly thought of the black prison she saw outside the giant wall. She immediately explained the situation to the patriarch and the elders. She observed their faces at the same time. The clan leader and the elders looked at each other with astonishment in their eyes. Really? The patriarch asked. Of course. Hathaway replied in a cold voice. There was a trace of doubt in her heart. It seemed that her father and the elders didn't know about it. It meant that her information channels weren't blocked by the family. But how to explain the huge black prison? What secrets were hidden by the Monster Research Institute? If this is true, then it's a bit terrible, an elder said in a dignified tone. The other elders' eyelids twitched, but they remained silent. Terrible. Hathaway's eyebrows slightly twitched. Does the Monster Research Institute want to use the black prison to deal with us? It's not impossible. An elder sighed. The patriarch coughed and interrupted him. He looked at Hathaway. You have just recovered from a serious injury. Take good care of your body. We will discuss this matter later. Everyone, let's go out first. The elders didn't say much. They turned around and left with the patriarch. Hathaway's eyes narrowed as she fell into deep thought. Half a day later, in the western district of an undamaged Earl city, there was a huge building. The land on the surface was vast and boundless, and there were also mysteries hidden underground. There were many underground bases that were tens of meters deep, like bamboo shoots that were upside down, and there were many of them. This was the headquarters of the Monster Research Institute. What? You said that the Dragon Clan saw the black prison outside the giant wall? Moreover, it was more than 10 meters in size. A middle-aged man with a burly physique was wearing a white coat in an office of one of the underground bases. He had a ferocious face. He was about 5 meters tall. He had the temperament of a butcher. However, he was wearing a white coat, which made him look a bit different and weird. At the moment, he was staring at a thin old man who came to report to him. The thin and weak old man stood in front of him like a little chick. After hearing his roar, he shivered and said, "This news came from the inner circle of the Dragon Clan. It was revealed after the injured Her Highness Hathaway woke up." Impossible. The burly middle-aged man roared. The black purgatory in our branches is still an experimental cultivation. How can there be a black purgatory that is more than 10 meters tall? This is a complete black purgatory, which is enough to trap an inner desolate level pioneer. How can it be cultivated at this stage? The skinny old man lowered his head, not daring to reply. An oval face wearing black-rimmed glasses next to the office said, "Director, is it possible that a branch of the academy secretly cultivated it, but didn't report it and secretly sent it outside the giant wall?" Impossible, the burly middle-aged man said without thinking. The cultivation of the black purgatory requires hunting the corpses of 8 specific monsters that are above level 50. Although these 8 monsters are not that precious, they are rare in our area. It is very difficult to catch them. Even if all the resources are gathered together, it is still impossible to cultivate it. Not to mention, the process of cultivation requires repeated experiments and corrections. Based on the current experimental progress, there is no later correction data. Even if there are resources, it is impossible to cultivate it. Only if there are several times more resources, or even more than 10 times more resources, can it be possible to cultivate it. Then, could it be that Hathaway made a mistake? Or the Dragon Clan deliberately released this news to frame our research institute? The woman slightly frowned. She couldn't think of any other answer. The burly middle-aged man's huge eyes moved slightly. No one knew what he was thinking, but he didn't answer her. "Barton, how long do you think it will take for our war to end?" At night, on Mount Utopia, the sky was full of stars. Joseph and Barton sat on the steps of the hillside, looking at the wall builders who were repairing the square overnight in St. Mark's Square. Joseph pulled the grass off the ground with his hands and held it in his mouth. Barton rolled up the Pope's robe and put on his legs. He sat on the ground with his underwear inside, unwilling to dirty his expensive robe. He shook his head and said, "When we win, or when he can't hold on anymore, it will end. He may not be able to hold on every time," Joseph said slowly. Joseph said slowly. His little face was no longer as childish as it was before. There was a hint of maturity and calmness on it. He's like us. He's also a human, a lowly commoner. It wasn't easy for him to reach this stage. No one helped him, and we couldn't help him either. This time, when the enemy attacked, we could only watch from the sidelines and pray. Barton was silent for a moment and lowered his head. We are his burden. Joseph's expression was wooden, as if he was stating a fact. Barton tilted his head to look at him and said, "Do you plan to leave him?" "No." Joseph shook his head. "On the contrary, I don't plan to continue being a burden." "Oh, do you still remember what he once said? There are many kinds of power. Not all people with great wrist strength are powerful." Joseph raised his head and stared at the night sky. Daring to fight, ruthless enough, is also power. "I'm going to train for a period of time." "Where are you going?" Barton asked. "The dirtiest place," Joseph replied. Barton was startled. He looked at him for a while and did not say anything else. Going to the dirtiest place? Did he want to die himself into the dirtiest person? He did not ask, but he knew that this was the only way to bring power. Because their wrist strength was weak, they could only dirty themselves. If they were so dirty that others did not dare to touch their hands, then they would win. This was a way for the weak to become strong. You stay and continue to help him. There are not many people around him that he can trust, and the people he trusts the most are unable to help him. "Wait for my return." Joseph patted Barton's shoulder and said goodbye. Barton raised his hand and gave him a fist bump. "Don't forget your original intention," he said. Joseph slightly grinned, revealing his snow-white teeth. "If I forget, would I still be considered a human?" The two looked at each other and smiled. The temple at the end of the square in front of them was brightly lit. The temple was empty except for Dean and Haisha. Dean rested his head on Aisha's legs. Her cold legs made the back of his head particularly cold. It was not comfortable, but he still liked this position because it made him feel very intimate and warm. He had a few books about the history of the giant wall. He wanted to see the secrets of the devil family, but the history of the giant wall seemed to have erased the period of time when the devil family appeared. No matter how many times he flipped through the books, he still could not find any information. It was like a period of time had disappeared silently in the long river of history. After many investigations, he found that the period of time that disappeared was about 30 years after the giant wall was built. The records of that period of time were very vague. One of the books mentioned the reason why the giant wall was built at that time, so there was no record. But he found that it was not the case from the mature historical records. The devil family seemed to have appeared out of thin air. They were appointed as the guardians of the giant wall by Queen Sylvia. Queen Sylvia disappeared shortly after the giant wall was built. Some records said that she went to the Holy Kingdom, and some records said that she returned to the God's realm. Dean slightly frowned. Although he knew that it was difficult to understand the war God family with the current information, but he only wanted to know about the devil family and the source of the bloodline power of the devil family. Now that he was a pioneer, if he wanted to continue to improve, in addition to a huge amount of God's marrow, he would have to awaken the bloodline power. But he didn't know whether this power was good or bad. He also didn't know how such power could be hidden in the human body. Moreover, ordinary people didn't have such power. Only the devil family had it. Chapter 738. The next day, St. Mark's Square was completely repaired. Another group of Dark Church's people secretly transported gunpowder to the passage under the square. The news about yesterday's battle was also blocked by the Dark Church. Only a small number of well-informed nobles were circulating. The number of patrolling knights who were stationed in Wutua Mountain had doubled. All the patrolling knights had a tacit understanding that all of this was caused by yesterday's war. No one dared to make a guess as to who the enemy was because the most likely target was the inner wall. Dean took Aisha to the square early in the morning to train her conditioned reflex commands. He had neglected his training since he returned from the wasteland. He was worried that her instincts would gradually overshadow his training due to the increasing number of attacks. This sign was shown after she broke out into the half-demon state. This time he focused on strengthening her attack and stop commands. For him, these 2 points were enough. He was forced to use Aisha as a weapon because he was weak. But that was the situation he didn't want to see. He believed that Aisha's consciousness still existed in her body. She wouldn't want to see his ferocious and bloodthirsty appearance if she saw it. Dean felt that Aisha would be able to stop Haley if she made a move. But he didn't train Aisha to concentrate her attacks. Once the command was issued, Aisha's first target would be Magic Scorpion God and the black-robed old man. She wouldn't chase Haley, who was further away. Aisha's attack would be indiscriminate except for Haley. Although he had learned his lesson this time, he still did not intend to train her in this aspect in detail. The reason was that similar situations might not happen again in the future. Secondly, he did not intend to let her fight again. Even if he encountered an enemy like Hathaway, he believed that with his own strength and the cooperation of the divine arts, he would be able to deal with her. He did not want to see her roar again. After the morning training, Dean went to the temporary laboratory outside the square. He saw Poland and Siam Manson were busy making the second magic hunting tool. "How do I make God's marrows?" Dean asked the two of them as they were experimenting. Instead of going to the inner wall to loot the Monster Research Institute, it would be better to master the production method of God's marrow. He believed that it wouldn't be difficult to get the materials to make God's marrow. Siam Manson had accepted his fate under Poland's guidance. He was honestly helping Dean make the magic hunting tools. He was surprised when he heard Dean's words. "You want us to make God's marrow? This is impossible." He had witnessed the battle yesterday. His mood had gone from excitement at the beginning to despair at the end. It was hard for him to accept the result. But he believed that sooner or later Dean would be attacked, as long as he continued to provoke the inner wall. "Why not? This is a secret. If we make it for you, only death awaits us." Hearing his words, Poland, who was next to him, was about to open his mouth to stop him, but he couldn't help but smile bitterly. He knew that it was too late to open his mouth to stop him, and he only hated himself for not informing him in advance. "So you know how to make it?" Dean's words extinguished the last trace of hope in Poland's heart. Siam Manson seemed to have been enlightened. He immediately shook his head and said, "We only know a little. We don't know much." Dean didn't waste time with him. He looked at Poland. "Do you want to do it or not? Tell me what materials you need." Poland glanced at Siam Manson, who was desperately trying to signal him with his eyes, and smiled bitterly in his heart. He wanted to strangle Siam Manson to death. What a pig-like teammate. He ignored Siam Manson's winking and looked at Dean. "We can make it, but the materials are difficult. It would be best if you can move the instrument from the Research Institute. If you can't, then we can smelt and make a new set ourselves. As for the two main materials, one is the soul crystal, which shouldn't be difficult for you to get. The other is the God's worm, which is a bit difficult, so you need to go to the Research Institute to get it." Siam Manson almost fainted as he heard Poland's words. He couldn't help but stare at him. Seeing his expression, Poland rolled his eyes angrily and didn't bother to pay attention. "God's worm. How much do you need?" Dean thought for a moment. "That depends on how much God's marrows you need. God worms reproduce very quickly. If you want to rob a research institute, the God worm stored in one should be enough to produce the God's marrows you need," Poland said. "That's right," Poland said. Dean nodded. He wanted to go to the inner wall to deal with the 12 cities. He couldn't continue to let them occupy the cities. It wouldn't take long for the corpses to subside. Siam Manson grabbed Poland's collar after Dean left. "What are you thinking about? Do you know that you will kill us?" Poland pushed him away and coldly glared at him. "Idiot, do you know that your first words have already sentenced us to death?" "What did you say?" Siam Manson was furious. "You let him know that we can make it. Unless we die now, we can only obediently make it for him." Poland looked at him coldly, as if he wanted to eat him. "Didn't you see the two gods of war yesterday, Hero and Ronan? Who were they? Army gods. They were honed in the military. What will happen to them if they fall into his hands? In the end, they had no choice but to listen to him and fight for him. In the end, they were even tied to his chariot and forced to work for him." Siam Manson was stunned. With this little devil's methods, even if you're a dead person, he can still make you speak. Poland said coldly, "If you had pretended that you didn't know anything at first, then we might have been able to escape. He still needs us to help him make the demon hunter tool, so he won't torture us. But you, an idiot, said something confidential. One idiot. If he sympathized with us, would he have locked us up here? Do you think this kid is a compassionate person? Xiao Manson was completely stunned. His mouth trembled, but he couldn't speak. Dean could hear the quarrel between Poland and Xiao Manson even after he left the temple. Poland should know that Dean could hear them, but he didn't bother to cover it up. Dean was too lazy to pay attention to them. After all, it was a lie to ask them to surrender to him. Chapter 739. Dean was shocked. He couldn't help but take 2 steps back, worried that she would lose control. But soon he knew that he was wrong. Aisha's body slowly curled up. Her face was filled with extreme pain. She held her head with both hands, squatting on the ground and roaring in pain. Her voice was sharp and harsh like a sharp blade. Dean was startled. He wanted to reach out and take her into his arms, but his reason told him that it was very dangerous to do so. He was angry and sad. His eyes were slightly moist. It seemed that the girl's pain was exerted on him. He could only stand there and watch her scream in pain. He gritted his teeth and slowly approached her. He tried to reach out and touch her hair. Aisha was startled. She suddenly looked up, bared her teeth at him, and roared angrily. Dean immediately retracted his hand, but tears flowed out of his eyes. He thought that he wouldn't cry again, but looking at her appearance, his heart collapsed again. What's going on? What the hell is going on? He was in pain and puzzled. At this moment, the sound of eggs breaking came from Aisha's back. He saw the shape of the lumps slowly bulging on her slender back. The shape of the lumps was getting bigger and sharper, like germinating bamboo shoots. It slowly grew at a speed visible to the naked eye until it pierced the soft chong sam on her back. It was exposed to the air. Impressively, there were dark red spikes. These spikes were like bones, but also like some kind of cuticle mixed with some kind of material. It was incomparably ferocious. Dean was stunned and looked at it in a daze. The dark red sharp bones grew more and more luxuriant. The longer ones were about 50 centimeters, covering her back like a small bamboo forest. At the same time, on her face, white lotus-like arms, neck, and other visible skin, dark red veins appeared. It was like blood vessels protruding, but the dark red veins seemed to be flowing with strange brilliance. This scene was extremely strange. Dean's mind was completely blank. He didn't know why it was like this. Aisha's painful moans continued. The dark red sharp bones had slowly stopped growing. She was lying on the ground. Her back was like a hedgehog. At the edge of the sharp bones, dark red liquid was slowly squeezed out. It was like blood, but it didn't have the smell of blood. The color was darker than blood. This fluid looked extremely thick, and it slowly outlined the shape of a pair of devil wings. The wings were getting bigger and bigger until they were fully stretched out and swept out. The chairs on both sides of the hall were knocked away. The carpet was also cut. Aisha's hands were covered with fine red scales. Her fingers were like claws as they dug into the carpet and pierced into the depths of the floor. Her whole body was in the state of a demon. She exuded an astonishing aura, like a peerless monster that had escaped from the abyss. Dean retreated a few steps due to the shocking aura. He didn't issue any instructions. How could she suddenly enter the demonic state? Moreover, the state of the devil body this time was completely different from the past. It was even more terrifying than when Haisha fought the Corpse King. At this time, Dean suddenly saw that the cold breath in her body was gone. Her whole body exuded amazing heat, like a strong fireball. The hot breath she exhaled was extremely hot, like a burning flame. When he was in a daze, Aisha's body staggered upright. Her pure black eyes fell on Dean, and the two looked at each other. At the moment when they looked at each other, Dean's mind went blank. It was as if something had exploded in the depths of his mind. He widened his eyes. At this moment, he had a strong feeling that the person in front of him was Aisha. Although it was still pure black eyes, the eyes that looked at him were definitely Aisha herself. His heart was pounding, and the blood in his body was boiling as if it was burning. He trembled and couldn't help but step forward. As soon as he took a step, Aisha's expression suddenly changed. She held her head and screamed at the sky. Her legs knelt on the ground. Dean hurriedly stepped forward to support her, who knew that as soon as his fingers touched her arm, Aisha's arm jerked violently. A turbulent force came and Dean's body flew out. At the same time, there was a sharp pain in his chest. He looked down and suddenly froze. The armor on his chest was broken, and there was a very clear claw mark. The skin inside was also torn off. He couldn't help but look up and saw Aisha lying on the ground, moaning in pain. She rolled left and right on the ground. Her wings drew a deep trench on the floor around her. Fortunately, the cable was buried deep, otherwise she would have been electrocuted on the spot. After more than 10 minutes, Aisha gradually stopped. Her face also returned to calmness. It seemed that the previous painful, twisted appearance didn't exist. Her demonic body also slowly shrank back into her body. Her whole body was lying on the ground, motionless like a corpse. There was no expression on her face. Dean slowly climbed up from the ground and found that the heat on her body quickly dissipated. Once again, she returned to the previous state of a corpse. There was no breath, no body temperature, just like a corpse. He was startled. Slowly and cautiously, he approached 2 steps, raised his hand, and shook the bell, issuing a command to stand up. Aisha's hands and feet pushed her body in a strange posture as she heard the bell ring. She staggered from the ground. Dean breathed a sigh of relief, but then he was puzzled. He circled around Aisha and looked left and right several times. The dark red bone spikes on her back had disappeared. Her back was smooth and snow-white, as beautiful as silk. It seemed that the previous scene was just his illusion. What happened? Dean was confused. At this time, Noyce ran in and saw the messy floor. "Master, are you okay?" "Just now." "It's nothing." Dean didn't look back. "The trip to the inner wall will be postponed until evening." "I know." Noyce was puzzled, but didn't ask much. Dean continued to look at Aisha. He frowned. The change was too sudden. There wasn't the slightest warning. He had never heard of the previous strange and horrible changes. After pondering for a long time, he slowly came up with an answer. He turned around and walked out of the hall. When he returned to the laboratory, he saw Poland and Siam Manson busying themselves. He called them over and asked, "There are 7 stages of awakening the dragon race's bloodline. Do you know what the changes are during each awakening?" Poland and Siam Manson looked at each other. They felt strange as to why Dean would suddenly ask this question. "Say it." Dean didn't give the 2 time to exchange glances and think. Poland frowned. "The awakening of the devil's bloodline is special, so we don't know. However, our institute has the combat data of the most outstanding ancestors of the Dragon Clan." "Let's hear it." Poland immediately began to speak. The coldness in Dean's eyes receded a bit. He nodded, "I know." Then he turned around and returned to the temple. Sure enough, it's the awakening of the bloodline. Dean looked at the expressionless Aisha in front of him. His guess was not wrong. The previous horrible change was caused by the awakening of her bloodline power, which was the 5th awakening. It was extremely difficult to awaken the bloodline of the Witcher family. Haisha was forced into a desperate situation in the battle with the Corpse King and awakened her bloodline 4 times. Now it was not a long time, but it was awakened again. It was an incredible thing. Under normal circumstances, it was impossible to happen. But Dean thought of an explanation, and that was the corpse poison. Chapter 740. A senior hunter infected with the undead has strength comparable to a limitless being. She is an inner wilderness pioneer. Although she lacks the demon hunter, her physique is stronger than before. I didn't expect that the power of the blood would evolve in the virus. Dean stared at the silent Aisha. He didn't know whether this change was good or bad. Would she slowly awaken to the 7th degree as the virus intensified in her body? Would she still be under his control at that time? What would happen at that time? He felt a little uneasy in his heart, but when he recalled the feeling when her bloodline had awakened, Even though that feeling was brief, he could feel that what he saw at that time was the real her. He didn't know if this feeling was an illusion or if it was caused by his excessive longing, but he didn't want to doubt it. That feeling stayed in his mind like a brand that couldn't be erased. His faith and confidence in resurrecting her became even stronger. After a dead silence, he raised his hand and held her hand. He looked at her reaction. No reaction. He slowly let out a sigh of relief and held her hand gently, feeling the warmth of his palm slowly pass into hers. To be able to hold hands like this forever, how blissful would that be? He gently held her hand and stared at her beautiful cheeks. Time seemed to not exist. After a long, long time, he slowly came back to his senses. He released her already warm and slender hand and softly said, "I will definitely find you and bring you back." Aisha was silent. Dean helped her to the bedroom and let her sit down. Now that he was a pioneer, he didn't intend to take her with him when he sneaked into the inner wall. After settling her down, Dean turned to leave. His mind was focused again. The power of the witch family can be stimulated by the virus. I don't know if the people of the witch family know about this. What is the structure of the virus? I really want to see the state of its movement in the human body. He came to the side hall to clean and bandage the wound on his chest. Fortunately, he often helped Aisha to groom her body. Although her tooth sockets secrete viruses, her nails were not as toxic as those of ordinary undeads. Most of the undeads lived outside the giant wall. In addition to viruses, there were also various monster hairs in their nails. There were also countless bacteria breeding in the cracks of their skin. But Aisha's fingers were as clean as a jade onion. Her scratches were not infected. In the evening, Dean went to the inner wall alone after he had recovered from his injuries. He flew to the giant wall and immediately saw that the number of troops stationed on the wall had increased a lot. Among them, there were 7 or 8 heat source figures that were relatively vigorous. They were all limited state experts. In addition, there was also a pioneer-level heat source figure. He knew that the inner wall had alerted the outer wall. He flew to the outside of the giant wall. He crossed the giant wall and landed in the inner wall after he entered the range of the inner wall. He followed the map of the inner wall and rushed towards one of the isolated cities. On the way, Dean found that in the originally uninhabited wilderness, from time to time, he could see wandering undeads, some of which were fighting with the monsters in the wilderness. Apart from that, he also saw a few wanderers in the wilderness. Their clothes were of good quality, but they were tattered. It was obvious that they were refugees in dire straits. He didn't help them, but bypassed them and rushed to his target city. Half an hour later, he came to the front of a city. He saw a large number of soldiers stationed on the fortress. The air was filled with a strong smell of blood. Unlike the fortresses he had seen before, this fortress seemed to have been occupied by the army. There was no shadow of the undeads. The air was still filled with the smell of burning corpses. Dean easily crossed the defense of the army and climbed over the other wall into the city. He saw the streets were full of blood, but there were no corpses. At first glance, it was clear that these corpses had been cleaned up. These corpses were piled up for a long time, so it was inevitable that they would spread plague and diseases in the air. He walked along the street and slowly released his perception. He didn't see any survivors on the road, but occasionally he saw some remaining undeads from some houses. It didn't take long for Dean to meet an army that was cleaning up the undeads in the city. There were not many people, only 10. All of them were limited state experts. They killed the undeads as if they were chopping melons and vegetables. He looked at them from a distance. He felt that it was similar to hunters hunting the undeads outside the giant wall. Some people were responsible for attracting the undeads with blood and sound. Some people were responsible for killing the undeads. Often the speed of the undeads couldn't catch up with the speed of killing. If it was the old era, I would have driven a tank into the city and swept it. Dean couldn't help but have such thoughts in his mind. He didn't walk away. This time he didn't come to the inner wall to find the worm, but more importantly, to destroy it. He slowly groped his way closer. He heard the 10 people laughing and chatting while killing the undeads. They didn't regard the surrounding area as a disaster zone. Such an open and above-board slaughter. It feels so F***ing good. Killing the undeads is so cool. It's much better than killing the monsters, haha. After cleaning up this area, let's take a break. I brought beer. You kid are smart. Don't be too careless. Be careful to attract the high-level undeads. Several people were chatting with each other, but their hands didn't stop. The undeads were attracted by the smell of blood from an animal's corpse. They quickly fell to the ground, and the corpses were piled up everywhere. All of their heads were destroyed. Dean looked around and saw that there was no one else. His eyes flashed, and he suddenly made a move. Whoosh! He was like a sharp arrow in the night, jumping to the nearest strong man. The strong man was waving a knife to cut the undeads. He didn't have time to react when Dean attacked him from behind. Dean's sickle arm cut off his neck. His mouth was still laughing, and then his head fell to the ground and rolled a few times. Another slender woman in military uniform was killing the undeads with her back to the strong man. She heard the laughter and stopped. She turned and smiled. Why is it? She didn't finish her words. She saw the headless body of the strong man stiffen in place. Blood gushed from the neck. At the same time, a strange face appeared in front of her. It was only a few feet away. Her smile froze, and she stared blankly. Before she could react, Dean threw his arm and pierced her hard in the chest. Then he continued to rush to another person. A person standing on a high place quickly noticed the change below and exclaimed, "Enemy attack!" What? The others turned their heads and were shocked. Chapter 741. The others widened their eyes. Recognizing that Dean was a pioneer, they immediately scattered and fled. Whoosh! One of them pulled out the chimney, and a long rainbow shot into the sky with a sharp whistling sound. It was a signal flare. Dean calmly chased after them one by one. A few minutes later, the battle was over. None of the 10 people escaped. Dean didn't stop. He covered his smell, turned around, and flew in another direction. About 10 minutes after he left, a figure came straight from the distance. With the help of the moonlight, he saw the 10 dead bodies on the ground. His face was pale, and his eyes flashed with cold light. He looked around to confirm that the murderer was not hiding in the surroundings. He jumped down from the building and landed in front of body. He reached out and checked the wound. At the same time, Dean ran all the way to the Monster Research Institute along the route on the map. He met some wandering undeads along the way, but he directly threw them off. Half an hour later, he appeared outside the Monster Research Institute. The Monster Research Institute of the city was also built in a remote place, surrounded by 2 hills. There were poisonous snakes and insects in the forest. He crossed the woods and stood on the top of the hill. His eyes penetrated the building built on the ground. He saw more than 10 patrolling figures, all of whom were high-level limitless. The number was 2 more than the Monster Research Institute he had looted before. His eyes flashed slightly, and he stared at the underground base. Inside the base, there were light, ordinary heat sources wandering, and they were busy with their own things. There was nothing unusual. He lurked on the hill and watched quietly. Half an hour later, everything in the underground base of the Institute was as usual. There was no unusual movement. He no longer hesitated. He stimulated the demon body, crawled on the ground, and rushed down the hillside like a monster. His abdomen and back were covered in strange blade-like limbs, as if he had more than a dozen blades on his body. As he ran, he cut the venomous snakes disguised as rotten leaves into several pieces, and in a few seconds he rushed to the front of the Research Institute. The 10 people in the Institute immediately noticed the movement and exclaimed. When the first exclamation sounded, Dean had jumped into the building and killed one of the guards by the window. Enemy attack! Someone come! Release the signal! All kinds of shouts echoed. Dudian was like a beast out of the cage as he rushed towards the limitless. Some of them activated their demonic bodies, some waved their weapons to resist, and some took the initiative to rush over. But they were cut into pieces as soon as they met Dudian. Dean's strange blade-like limbs were too sharp. They were like countless knives stirring and the strength was so great that ordinary metal weapons would be cut off in an instant. They were as fragile as wood. One of the Lemeters, who had stimulated the rare magic Mars Steel Dragon, was instantly beheaded by Dean. He had no resistance. Steel Dragon Magic Mark was one of the most powerful rare magic marks. It was famous for its terrifying defensive power. It could make the whole body as hard as steel, especially the back, which was harder than ordinary metal. Even a weapon made from a high-level monster's body may not be able to cut it. But in front of Dean's sharp blade, the fragile paper was torn in an instant. In the blink of an eye, there were 7 or 8 messy corpses scattered around Dean. Some had a horrible hole in their chest, some had half of their head cut off, and some had their bodies broken into pieces. The rest had escaped to the underground base. Dean was about to rush in when his pupils suddenly shrank. He saw 2 extremely hot figures in the underground base. They were 2 pioneers. Ambush! A murderous look flashed in his eyes. The 2 pioneers had concealed their heat source and were hiding in the underground base. He was far away and didn't use his X-ray vision. He only used the heat source to capture them, so he didn't notice them. But at this moment, the intensity of the heat source exposed by the 2 pioneers was only at the level of ordinary pioneers, incomparable to Hero and Ronan. He didn't retreat, but broke into the underground base at a faster speed. He passed by the 2 frontiersmen who had just run to the stairs. The 2 frontiersmen immediately froze, and then blood sputtered from all over their bodies. Their bodies were pushed away, and they fell to the ground in several pieces. Their organs and blood rolled on the ground. At this time, the 2 pioneers' heat sources rushed out of the underground base. They were a man and a woman. They were relatively young. The woman was in her teens, and the man was in his early 20s. Dean knew that the Monster Institute had many drugs that could preserve youth. Although it couldn't restore the appearance of a 50-year-old man to a teenager, it wasn't difficult for a 30-year-old man to look like a young man in his early 20s. If they were persistent in this aspect, they could also change their skin, but it would cost a lot. "Who are you?" Seeing the 2 piles of flesh on the stairs, the young man's eyes were filled with anger. He stared at Dean coldly. He had already seen that Dean was just an ordinary pioneer, so he was a little relieved. Dean didn't talk nonsense. He directly pounced on the 2. "Kill!" The 16 or 17-year-old girl beside him let out a light shout and immediately entered the demon body state. The lower half of her body transformed into a long snake tail, but 2 incomplete white bone wings protruded from her back. They were like sharp swords that glowed with a cold light. The young man didn't hold back either. His demonic body was like a giant ape. His body was more than 3 meters tall, and his whole body was covered with thick, dark golden hair. His chest muscles were full like granite, and his mouth was full of sharp teeth. When the 2 entered the demonic body, Dean had already pounced. His movements were strange, like a fox or a monkey. The sharp blade limbs on his back, chest, and abdomen swayed in the air, rubbing against each other and making a teeth-aching sound. When he approached the young man who looked like a giant ape, all the sharp blade limbs instantly shot out. At the same time, his body also bounced up from the ground and pounced on the young man's chest. The young man was shocked and angry. He roared and raised his huge fist to smash. "Chi! Chi!" 2 tearing sounds rang out. Dean's body fell into the young man's arms, and both of his hands went into the young man's chest. The young man's eyes were wide open, and his face was full of disbelief and horror. The next moment, Dean withdrew and dodged the attack of the half-human, half-snake woman next to him. When he turned around and landed on the ground, the young man's body fell straight down. 2 bloody holes appeared on his rock-like chest muscles. They were penetrated by Dean's arms, and the young man's fists were also cut off. 1 face-to-face kill on the spot. Dean deeply felt the horror of Splitter's magic marks. If it was another enemy, the young man would still have room to fight. But his whole body was full of sharp blade limbs, and almost 80% of his body could be used as a sharp blade to attack. The young man simply couldn't do anything. "No!" The snake woman next to him was shocked when she saw the ape youth fall to the ground. A look of fear appeared on her girlish face. She suddenly opened her mouth and spat out a stream of green liquid from the fangs in her upper tooth sockets. The speed of the liquid was very fast, but Dean was already prepared. He used his hands and feet to bounce up from the ground and dodge the green liquid. At the same time, he rushed towards Snake Woman. Snake Woman held two thin swords in her hands and chopped towards Dean. The swords danced like two silver discs. But the moment they came into contact with Dean's sharp blade limbs, the dancing silver swords stopped abruptly. It was like a rapidly stirring fan was suddenly stuck. Clang! The sound of metal breaking echoed. One of the thin swords broke, and the tip of the sword fell to the ground. Snake Woman's eyes widened as she twisted her tail and retreated. Dean's blade-like limbs quickly grasped and surrounded him like a palm. A dash! Snake Woman screamed as her body was surrounded by sharp blade limbs. Blood oozed out her body. The dark green snake phosphorescence on the surface of her body was useless and was easily cut. Chapter 742. The battle ended quickly. Dean felt that he could kill them, but he didn't expect it to be so easy. He felt that he had underestimated his combat ability. Perhaps it would be a bit difficult for him to fight against Hero, who was at the peak of the outer wilderness. But compared to ordinary pioneers, he was a lot stronger. He withdrew his demonic body and took out a small bottle from his bosom. He came in front of the giant ape youth and poured a few drops of water from the small bottle onto the bloody hole in his chest. Then he came in front of the Snake Woman and dripped a few drops onto the wound on her neck. Although he didn't know if it was too late, but if he was successful, he would be able to create 2 more pioneers' corpses. He had to push the chaos in the inner wall to the extreme in order to give himself space to grow. After doing this, he turned around and rushed into the underground base. Although the battle here was short, the people in the base had been alarmed. At this moment, they were rushing out of the various laboratories in a panic, and the alarm was ringing incessantly on every floor. He sped along the way, killing all the researchers who tried to stop him. A few minutes later, he was in a laboratory on the 8th floor of the underground base. He looked at the white-bearded old man and the young female assistant in front of him. He was able to recognize the identity of the doctor from the Monster Research Institute. He said to the old man, "Hand over the god's marrow and the god's worm." The young female assistant shivered in fear. Her face turned pale as she shrank behind the white-bearded old man. In a corridor outside the laboratory, there were corpses of people in white coats lying on the ground. Blood dyed the corridor red. It was like a purgatory on earth. The white-bearded old man stared at Dean. "You won't get it even if you kill me." "I know. Poland told me that if I want to take the worm, then I need your password. Otherwise, the things inside will be destroyed." Dean's hands were stained with blood. "Old man, don't be stubborn with me. You will pay a price you don't want to see. Kill me if you have the ability." The white-bearded old man stared at Dean without any fear. Dean looked at him for a moment. Suddenly, he raised his hand. A sharp blade protruded from his arm and pierced through the chest of the young female assistant behind the old man. The sharp blade protruded from her back and lifted her up. "What do you think?" Dean calmly said, "I will give you 3 seconds. She can survive if I stop in time." The white-bearded old man looked at him angrily, clenching his fists in anger. His body trembling, he gritted his teeth and said, You. Dean waved his arm, and the young female assistant was thrown out like a sandbag. She hit the door and died. "I won't let you go even if I die." The white-bearded old man gritted his teeth and pointed his finger at the tip of Dean's nose. "You will die a horrible death." Dean slowly said, "It doesn't matter if you don't say it. I have some understanding of you. You are not afraid of death, but what about your relatives? If you think they're not afraid of death, then you can continue to be stubborn. I can go to the next city. I will go to the next research institute." The white-bearded old man's eyes widened, revealing a trace of fear. "Your stubbornness will only make the next research institute die in vain. You should learn from Siam Manson and Poland. Surrender and tell me everything." Dean continued to threaten and tempt the old man. 10 minutes later, Dean came out of the research institute with 2 big bags. One was the God's Marrows, and the other was the semi-finished product Dark Prison. The other one was the God's Marrows. On the 8th floor of the underground base, the white-bearded old man was lying in front of the oval-shaped metal instrument. His chest was pierced. Dean didn't plan to take the old man out of the institute. Siam Manson and Poland were enough to help him. Moreover, he had to go to the Earl's city to see the situation. The informants that he had planted in the inner wall had been cut off. It was extremely difficult for his informants to pass the information. He had to come in person to check the situation. The night was deep. From time to time, the screams of the undeads and the sound of metal colliding could be heard from the streets of the city. There were no lights or noise in the city. It was exceptionally silent. Dean left the city and went straight to the west. He arrived at the giant wall, not far away. He buried the 2 bags under the giant wall and then went back again. He didn't go back to the previous city, but went straight to the east. 2 hours later, he came to the front of a majestic city. The city's fortress was lit with lights, and soldiers were stationed there. The smell of blood in the air was light. It was almost impossible to smell it. Compared to other cities, this place was calm. It seemed that the undeads had never attacked this place. However, Dean saw some corpses on the road outside the city. There were arrows nailed to their heads. They had been dead for a long time. Dean looked up for a moment. He moved to the side of the fortress and quietly climbed over the wall. It was a piece of cake for a pioneer to sneak into the city. As soon as he entered the city, Dean was surprised by the situation inside. It was very lively. The streets were full of lights, and pedestrians were wandering around. There was not the slightest smell of war. It was like the city he saw before the outbreak of the corpses. He knocked out a lone civilian in the shadows, took off his clothes, and changed into them. Then, he blended into the crowd and looked around as he walked. After walking along the city wall for a few streets, Dean saw the changes. Several high walls were built on the side of the city wall. It seemed to be used for isolation. Starved to death, happy to death. Dean's eyes flashed slightly. He came to a nearby tavern. The best place to get information was naturally the tavern. "Give me a drink." Dean sat at the bar and called. "Little brother, what kind of wine do you want?" A woman dressed in gorgeous clothes smiled charmingly. "The most expensive wine," Dean said. "Little brother is really forthright." The smile on the gorgeous woman's face was more charming. "I'll give it to you." Soon a glass of dark red wine was handed to him in glass. The wine was different. Even the glass was not a wooden cup. Dean took it, but did not drink it. Instead, he said to himself, "If I don't spend money, when the undead plague comes, I won't be able to spend it." When the gorgeous lady heard his mumbling, she pursed her lips into a smile and said, "Little brother, you're right. Do you want another cup?" Dean was speechless. He wanted to lead her to talk about the undead plague. He did not expect that she would take advantage of the situation. Instead, she used his words to encourage him to spend money. It seemed that he could not be too vague with these people. He immediately said, "Are you not afraid of the undead plague coming here? I heard that a lot of people died in other cities outside." Chapter 743. Dean had seen the undeads outside the city. He knew that she was right. He looked around cautiously. Isn't there a rumor that the corpse plague was jointly created by the monastery and the military? Will it be more dangerous for us to stay here? The gorgeous woman was startled and hurriedly covered Dean's mouth. She glared at him and looked around. Seeing that no one was paying attention, she slowly let go of Dean's hand, but her eyes were full of warning. "Don't talk nonsense. Do you want my shop to be smashed by talking about these things here? It's life-threatening. I have no other choice," Dean said apologetically. No wonder he didn't hear anyone talking about this matter in the tavern. The news that he had spread in the Earl's city seemed to have disappeared. It turned out that the news was blocked. It was no wonder that the rumors not only stopped at the wise, but also the strong. The gorgeous woman didn't look at Dean. Considering that Dean had spent a lot of money, she whispered, "Don't talk about this outside. Once it is leaked, be careful of the dark prison. Even if the news is true, we have no way to go. We can only stay here. The corpse plague is everywhere outside the city. We will die if we go out." Can we spend money to hire a strong person to protect us? Dean immediately asked. The gorgeous woman shook her head. Don't think about it. As you said, who will take a burden out of the city when it is life-threatening? Unless you have tens of thousands of gold. But if you really have so much money, I advise you stay here. If you are afraid of death, you can use this money to bribe the military. Maybe you can get shelter. Give it to a stranger to lead the way out of the city. In the blink of an eye, they will rob you and throw your corpse in the wilderness. That would be a death of injustice. Dean saw that she was not bad. He nodded slightly. Thank you. Have another cup. It's my treat. Treat? The gorgeous woman didn't expect Dean to be so generous. Her face suddenly showed a charming smile. Thank you, little brother. Dean drank 2 mouthfuls and got up. He took out a dozen banknotes from his back and handed them to her. Is this enough? Of course it's enough. There's more. The gorgeous woman immediately took out money from the drawer behind the counter and gave it to Dean. Dean took the money but didn't put it in his pocket. He turned around and walked away. When he passed by a strong man who was drinking, his arm shook slightly and the banknote in his hand disappeared. He stuffed the banknote into the man's pocket. This was his money, so he naturally had to return the money. It seems that the effect of the undercover agents spreading rumors here is not ideal. Dean walked out of the pub and strolled along the street. It seems that the chaos in the Earl's city is basically impossible. If this trend continues, then we can send troops to clean up the other cities. In less than half a month, all the cities will be cleaned up and restored to vitality. The civilians and nobles of the inner wall were happy to see such a situation, but he didn't want to see it. He needed to save time to keep the inner wall in chaos. It seems that I have to prepare another method. His eyes flickered slightly, and he walked around the outer walls of the city to observe the defensive forces in various places. He found that most of them were guarded by hunters. There was a limitless one stationed at every few hundred meters, and there was a pioneer stationed at each of the 4 main city gates in the east, south, west, and north. He could easily break through the defensive strength of the city by himself, but he believed that near the Earl's castle in the center of the city, there was at least 1 pioneer at the level of God of War, or even 2 or 3 pioneers. He did not intend to get close, so he quietly climbed over a weak city wall and left. He did not follow his previous plan to destroy the city. These defenders were just hunters, so it was useless to kill more of them. Moreover, he knew that it would be difficult to delay the restoration of the inner wall, even if he created 1 or 2 pioneers' corpses. He left quickly under the cover of the night. 2 hours later, he arrived at the bottom of the giant wall where the god's marrow was hidden. He looked at Black Prison's bag and saw that Black Prison was obediently staying in the glass jar. He heaved a sigh of relief, picked up the bag, and flew up the giant wall. He returned to Utopia Mountain at around 2 o'clock in the morning. It was late at night. The top of the mountain was quiet. The moonlight shone on the empty square. Dean landed in front of the temple and gently pushed the door open. The candlelight was bright, and the wall lamps were burning quietly. Aisha was sitting alone on the edge of the bed. She still maintained the same posture as when Dean left. Dean felt guilty when he saw her dull expression. He put down the things in his hand, came forward to sit down with her, and softly said some words. He told her the whole process of going to the inner wall. It was as if he was telling a very simple thing. He took out a purple flower and handed it to her nose. Purple is your favorite. Does it look good? Haisha sat in a daze and did not answer. Dean gently smiled as he put the flower in her hair. He took a mirror from the side and handed it to her. Does it look good? Silence was the only response. He put down the mirror, got up, and went to the side of the bedroom. He took the bottle of hot water, washed his hands and face, and then washed the towel. Then he took the warm towel back to her, took her hand, and gently wiped each of her fingers with the towel. Her fingers were as white as jade. This was something he never stopped every day. It had almost become a habit. 10 minutes later, after wiping her body clean and changing into new clothes, he helped her lie down and closed her eyes. After doing all this, he returned to the basin and washed his hands. He wrung out the towel and returned to the hall. He untied the bag on the carpet and took out the godworm and black prison. He then carried them out of the temple and went to the laboratory on the side of the square. Although it was late at night, the laboratory was still brightly lit. Some people were busy. Dean entered the door. The three alchemists were shocked when they saw Dean. They quickly saluted. Dean put down the things and asked them to wake up Xiao Manson in Poland. After a moment, both of them came in front of him with sleepy eyes. "Mr. Dean, we won't have the energy to work during the day if we don't sleep well." Xiao Manson was angry as he muttered, "I've taken back the God's worm. I hope you can produce the God's marrow with maximum efficiency." Dean pointed to the things on the table. "Don't be lazy. I've asked Professor Luo Wei how much God's marrow you can produce every day. I hope you won't make me use unnecessary means to force you." Professor Luo Wei was the white-bearded old man. Poland and Xiao Manson's sleepiness disappeared as they heard Dean's words. They were surprised as they looked at the God's worm and dark prison. They didn't expect Dean to bring them back in such a short time. "Have you seen Professor Luo Wei? Where is he?" Poland's eyes moved away from the dark prison as he asked Dean. "I killed him." Dean's expression didn't change. It was as if he had just pinched a fly. Poland and Xiao Manson froze as they looked at him in shock. Soon they judged from Dean's expression that the boy wasn't lying. You killed Professor Luo Wei." Poland clenched his fists. "You are not a human." Xiao Manson didn't think that Dudian would dare to speak like that. He was scared and slightly retreated. He looked at Dean. "Mr. Dean, why didn't you bring Dr. Luo Wei back? His technology is much better than ours. You two are enough unless you don't want to live. I can catch another one to replace him." Chapter 744. Dean went back to the temple after leaving the laboratory. He took out the god's marrows and injected 2 tubes into himself. He felt his body was inflating and boiling. Then he went to bed and slept. Dean got up early the next morning. He called Noyce to ask about the situation of the outer wall. The outer wall had become peaceful. Although the policies proposed by Dean had caused an uproar, but it had gradually subsided. There were occasional disturbances, but Richelieu and Barton had dealt with them. The nobles of the outer wall had no choice but to bow their heads in the face of the joint forces of the magistrate, the Holy Church, the military, and the Dark Parliament. Although the nobles were strong, but there were a large number of them. It was difficult for them to compete with the 4 forces. In the entire outer wall, Dean was able to cover the sky with one hand. The military, the magistrate, and the Holy Church were in his hands. Even if he were to distort black and white, it would be legal. No one would dare to have any objection. It will take at least 3 days to open up the mountain and fill it with gunpowder. Noyce said. Dean frowned. So long? Although it was a huge project, and it was very difficult to complete it in 3 days. But don't forget that he had countless labor and money in his hands. He could drive countless civilians to do things for him. The wall builders have investigated. The rock structure inside the mountain is special. It will be difficult to open it. Noyce lowered his head. Dean slightly frowned. 3 days was a bit slow for him. Although it was estimated that the inner wall would recover in half a month, but it didn't mean that the inner wall wouldn't send troops to attack the outer wall. After all, the last time Haley attacked the inner wall with many pioneers, it was bound to cause an uproar. It was enough to make the higher-ups of the inner wall pay attention to it. Send people to the Parliament to select some hunters who are good at opening up the rock and have similar magic marks to help. Dean said after a little thought, I know, Master. Noyce nodded, but there was a trace of worry in his eyes. He saw that Dean was mobilizing all the troops. It meant that the crisis was imminent. How is the Potioneers' camp doing? Is there anything useful? Dudian asked, as he didn't wait for him to leave. Noyce paused for a moment. Ever since the establishment of the Potioneering Battalion, we have been researching all kinds of medicines. We have made great breakthroughs in the field of healing medicines. If a war breaks out in the future, what about poisons? Dean interrupted him and asked immediately. Poison? Noyce was startled. The research on poison is relatively slow. Considering that we will be fighting with the inner wall, the pharmacist camp should focus on the treatment aspect. Dean sighed in his heart. He blamed himself for not reminding them earlier. There is no need to study the treatment. Stop immediately and let them develop the poison. It doesn't matter what type of poison it is, as long as it can make people lose their combat ability. The most important thing is that it must be unsolvable. Do all potioneers make poisons? Yes. Then the medicine for treatment. If there's a war, then the soldiers of the outer wall won't be able to compete with the inner wall. What's the use of the medicine if the battlefield is one-sided? Noyce was startled, but why did you let the barbarians settle in the slums? Why did you let the army recruit people? Aren't they going to die in vain? They're going to die, but not in vain. Dean said straightforwardly as he saw that Noyce didn't understand his intentions. There are only two options for the inner wall to recover us. The first one is to send the pioneers to kill me and reduce innocent casualties. The second one is to launch an all-out war. In this case, they will have to think twice if all the people in the outer wall are soldiers. They want to recover the outer wall, not destroy it. Noyce understood. He didn't think that Dean would use the lives of these people as a bargaining chip and not as strength. No matter how many soldiers there were, they couldn't be compared to the combat power of the inner wall. They didn't have the capital to regard them as strength. But he looked at Dean. Although the military has high recruitment benefits, but there aren't many people joining the army. The civilians may not be willing to help us if there is a war. They will help us, Dean said calmly. They have enough reasons to fight for us. The inner wall has been reminding them of this reason for the past 300 years. What reason? They can become nobles if they go to war and kill the enemy. 4 days passed in the blink of an eye. Everything was going on in an orderly manner. The mountain had been completely opened up and filled with explosives. The whole project only took 2 days with the cooperation of a large number of hunters. At the same time, countless miners were wantonly digging in the saltpeter mines of the outer wall. Transport routes were densely packed. The entire outer wall had entered the stage of comprehensive preparation for war. Dean stayed in the temple in the last 4 days. He practiced fighting while thinking about the current situation. He was observing the inner wall and arranging people to infiltrate it. Although the war could break out at any time, he wanted to send as many people as possible into the inner wall. Unfortunately, the time is too short. If I was given 3 years, then I wouldn't need to spend a single soldier to conquer the inner wall. Dean sighed in his heart. Some people think that time is too slow. Some people don't have enough time. On the wall of size, the number of soldiers stationed that were patrolling back and forth. Hundreds of miles away from this wall, the outline of the human city could be clearly seen, but the flames of war resounded everywhere. Everywhere was filled with smoke, and the city walls were in ruins. Many towering and sturdy city walls had been destroyed somehow, and the traces of destruction were shocking. The air was filled with the strong stench of rotting corpses. The clouds were floating in the sky, and the breeze was warm. All these changes did not affect the sky in the slightest. Sunlight quietly penetrated through the clouds and shone on the towering giant wall. In the hunter zone where the monsters lived, huge monsters crawled and hunted for prey. A group of human figures slowly appeared at the end of the area. The human figures were standing in a row. All of them were wearing robes and carrying a variety of strange weapons. Some weapons were 4 or 5 meters long size, and some weapons were giant spikes. They walked very slowly, but their figures quickly became clear. A boar-like monster that was gnawing on the walking dead noticed the group of human figures and immediately rushed towards them with a howl. Chapter 745. They didn't see anyone take action. The group of people still maintained a leisurely pace. There were a total of 10 people. Each of them had a unique temperament like a black hole that attracted attention. As they passed by the corpse of the monster whose organs were scattered all over the ground, one of them bent down and reached out to grab a well-preserved heart that was still beating. He lowered his head and gnawed on it, making slurping sounds. At this time, the other 9 people came to the shadow of the giant wall and stopped. They looked up at the majestic and steep giant wall. We finally arrived. One of them lifted his hood and revealed a handsome face. However, the left side of his cheek was engraved with a twisted centipede tattoo. It made his faint smile look a bit ferocious. Squeak, squeak, squeak. There is no one station on the god's wall. The people in this giant wall are really comfortable. Another person made a sharp sound like a mouse. His shoulders kept shaking as he spoke. Let's go up and see, another petite woman said. After that, she suddenly jumped up the giant wall and then ran up the steep and straight giant wall as if the gravity on the ground had lost its effect on her. In the blink of an eye, she came to the top of the giant wall. She stood on the edge of the giant wall. The ground was thousands of meters below her feet. It was like a cliff. People with acrophobia would feel dizzy at a glance. However, she was very calm. She let the strong wind blow from high altitude to make her robe flutter. Really impatient, another person shook his head and jumped. This jump was hundreds of meters high. He patted the giant wall with his palm. It seemed that he could use the force to jump again. He repeated this for 10 times and quickly climbed up the giant wall. The others also used their own skills. Some transformed their wings and flew directly to the giant wall. Some stuck their hands to the giant wall like suction cups and climbed up like geckos. In the blink of an eye, all 10 people stood on the top of the towering giant wall. They suddenly revealed a surprised look. It's all wasteland? How come the inside of the wall is more desolate than the outside? There are no signs of human activities. If I didn't walk all the way here, I would have thought that we just climbed over the wall. Squeak, 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 what a barren place. No wonder His Majesty said that there were no sovereigns overseeing this place. Every godly wall has the same size. The humans in this godly wall seem to only live in the center. Their population is incomparable to ours. Boss, should we eliminate the devil hunter families here? With that, the gazes of a few of them landed on a hunchbacked old man in the middle. This old man's face was snow white, as if he had no hair on his body. There was a small black snake tattoo on his cheek. He shook his head slightly and said, "Our mission this time is to obtain the sacred remains of the goddess of War Sylvia. Don't do anything meaningless." But His Highness said that if necessary, we can weaken the power of this place so that we can use it to subdue it in the future, said the person who had asked earlier. Big bro, there's no sovereign overseeing this place. Who would dare to fight us? Why don't we sweep this place clean? Who knows, we might be able to obtain some treasures. Gee, I agree. The old man glanced at them, sighed, and said, "Since your hands are itchy, go ahead. But first, let's get down to business." With his permission, these people's eyes flashed with bloodlust. They were so excited that they wanted to jump off the godly walls and start the slaughter. "Old Seven, you stay here," the old man said to a short youth on his left. "Don't let anything happen to you. Otherwise, we'll be trapped here forever, unable to go back. Big bro, you're too careful. With the 10 of us, even if there's a sovereign overseeing this place, he'll still die under our blades. Besides, there's no sovereign overseeing this place," said a tall and sturdy man heroically. "Don't be careless." The old man frowned. Even though there's no sovereign, the devil hunter families should have peak inner desolate level experts. They can compare to you guys. Hearing this, the tall and sturdy man licked his lips. He didn't say anything else, but his eyes revealed his desire for battle. "Old Seven, wait for us here. If anything happens, don't fight," said the old man to the short youth. "Little Seven understands. Big bro, be careful. I'll wait for you here." The short youth nodded. Beside him, a graceful lady rubbed his cheeks and pulled him into her arms. She used her ample breasts to rub his head. When he was almost out of breath, she let him go and giggled, "Little Seven, be good. This is your reward. Third sister, you should take a shower. There's a smell." The short youth coughed. The graceful woman rolled her eyes in annoyance. "How many times have I told you to stop so that I could take a shower? You just have to listen to me. I think you won't be able to find a girlfriend in this lifetime." The short youth smiled bitterly and mumbled, "Let's go." The old man didn't want to chat anymore. He said coldly and jumped off the wall. The graceful lady waved at the short youth. She turned around and fell off the wall. Her movement was elegant, as if she didn't care that she was 1,000 meters above the ground. The others followed her. Some waved goodbye to the short youth. One by one, they jumped off the wall and followed the old man, heading towards the wasteland. Inner wall, Dragon Clan. Father, what did the Monster Research Institute say? Hathaway had recovered most of her strength. She was able to walk and exercise. She looked at her tired father in front of her. She was concerned about his reply. They said that there is no such thing as a black prison. Either we are wrong or there is another reason. They will send people to investigate. The patriarch looked at her. You don't need to worry about this matter. Take a good rest. Your grandmother knew that you were injured, so she gave you 2 bottles of dragon blood. I hope you can take this opportunity to stimulate the power of your bloodline. Hathaway didn't pay attention to the patriarch's words. Her eyes flashed for a moment. Father, I have an idea. Can we secretly capture the black prison outside the giant wall and use it for us? Since the Monster Research Institute said that there is no such thing, they won't dare to say anything if we bring it over. The patriarch shook his head without thinking. Of course not. If what you saw is the real black hell, then it means that the Demonic Creature Research Institute is intentionally hiding something. If that black hell doesn't even know about the Demonic Creature Research Institute, then its origin is even stranger. If we bring it back, the Demonic Creature Research Institute will definitely want it back. Father, we don't need to bring it back to the giant wall. We can send it to the fortress in the wasteland. Ever since Sister left, there's a shortage of manpower. With the black prison there, even if we encounter a monster with a level of more than 100, we can deal with it. The Monster Research Institute won't know about the situation in the fortress. Even if they know, we have our own excuses. The patriarch's heart moved as he looked at her. He knew what his daughter was thinking, but what she said was right. The Monster Research Institute wouldn't be able to control it if it was sent to the fortress. I will think about it. In any case, let's find the black prison first. I have sent people to look for it several times, but they couldn't find it. Hathaway knew that he was tempted by the patriarch's words. She secretly sneered. Father, you should send more masters in tracking. I will go and find it myself. The patriarch looked at her for a moment and nodded. All right. Hathaway immediately got up and said, There is no time to lose. I will go now. Your injury hasn't healed. It doesn't matter. I'm fine. With that, Hathaway turned around and left the hall. The patriarch looked at her back and sighed softly. Patriarch, the coordinates that His Highness gave you should be wrong. A middle-aged butler whispered. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.